Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed it before I even picked it up. My phone was sitting at the foot of the bed. Not just near it, right at the edge, screen facing up like it had been placed there deliberately. I stayed still for a second, just looking at it. I always charge my phone on the bedside table, same spot every night. Plugged in, screen down, cable tucked behind the lamp. That's where it had been when I fell asleep. I was sure of that. I pushed myself up slowly, the duvet shifting around me. The room was dim. Early morning light just starting to come through the blinds. Everything else looked normal, except the phone. I reached down and picked it up. The screen lit immediately. Battery at 3%. I frowned. That didn't make sense either. It had been plugged in overnight. I remembered seeing the charging icon before I went to sleep. I turned toward the bedside table. The cable was still there, plugged in, exactly where it should be, but the end of it, the part that goes into the phone, was just resting on the table, like it had been pulled out. I stared at it for a second, trying to think. Maybe I'd unplugged it in the night without realizing. That happens sometimes. You wake up halfway, do something, then forget. But I didn't remember getting up, didn't remember touching the phone at all. I looked back down at it in my hand. No notifications, no apps open, just the lock screen. I unlocked it. Went straight to the battery usage. Nothing unusual. No app draining power overnight. No long screen on time. Just a steady drop like it had been off charge the whole time. I checked the charging history. It showed it had been unplugged at around 2:17 a.m. I stared at that for a while, tried to place myself at that time. Nothing came to mind. No memory of waking up. No reason I would have unplugged it. I rubbed my face and looked around the room again. Everything else was exactly as I left it. Clothes on the chair, door closed, curtains half drawn. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor felt colder than usual. I walked over to the bedside table and picked up the cable, still plugged into the wall. No sign it had been yanked or pulled, just disconnected. I plugged the phone back in. The charging symbol appeared immediately. I watched it for a second, like I expected something else to happen. Nothing did. I sat back down on the bed, holding the phone. Something about the way it had been placed didn't sit right. It wasn't just dropped there, it was aligned, centered, facing upward, like someone had set it there carefully. I tried to shake it off, told myself I probably just moved it in my sleep, even if I didn't remember. That was the most reasonable explanation. I went about my day, work, errands, normal routine, but it stayed in the back of my mind. That placement, the battery, the unplugged cable. That night, I made a point of checking everything before I went to sleep. Plugged the phone in, made sure it was charging, set it face down on the table. I even took a quick photo of it, just to be sure I wasn't misremembering. Then I went to bed. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, didn't know what time. The room was completely dark, no light from outside, no sound. I lay there for a moment, not moving. Something felt off, not the phone this time, just the room. The air felt different, like it had shifted slightly. I turned my head toward the bedside table. The phone wasn't there. My chest tightened. I didn't sit up right away, just looked at the spot where it should be, empty. I slowly pushed myself up and looked around. The room was too dark to see clearly. I reached over and turned on the lamp. The light filled the space. I looked at the table again. No phone. I scanned the floor. Nothing. Then I looked at the foot of the bed. It was there. Same position as before, right at the edge, screen facing up. I felt a cold pressure in my chest. Not sharp, just heavy. I didn't remember moving it, not even slightly. I picked it up again. Battery at 2%, still plugged in when I fell asleep. Still drained now. I checked the cable, unplugged again, resting on the table, same as before. I looked at the time, 2:19 a.m., almost the same time as the night before. I didn't move for a while. Just sat there, holding the phone, listening. The house was silent, no footsteps, no movement. Nothing that suggested anyone else was there. I got out of bed and checked the door. Still closed, still locked. I checked the windows, all shut, nothing out of place. I went back to the bed and sat down. Looking at the phone in my hand, I opened the recent apps. Nothing. Checked messages, nothing new. Call log, empty. Battery usage again. Same pattern, like it had just been sitting there, draining slowly. But I knew it hadn't, because it had been charging. I plugged it back in, watched the screen light up. Then I did something I hadn't thought to do before. I opened the camera, switched it to video, and set it up facing the bed, pointed directly at where the phone had been. Then I lay back down, left the light on this time. I didn't fall asleep right away, just lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting. Nothing happened for a while. Eventually, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, it was morning, sunlight coming through the blinds. Everything looked normal. I sat up quickly and looked at the bedside table. The phone was there, exactly where I'd left it, plugged in, charging, battery at 87%. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Then I remembered the video. I reached over, unplugged the phone, and opened the recording. It had captured everything overnight. Hours of nothing. Just the room. Still. Quiet. I skipped ahead to around 2 a.m., watched the footage carefully. At 2:17, the image shifted slightly. Not much. Just a subtle misalignment, like the frame had moved, then it jumped forward, 3 seconds missing. When it resumed, the phone was gone from the table. I felt my stomach drop. I rewound it, watched it again, same thing, no movement, no visible cause, just a shift, a gap, and then the phone was no longer there. I skipped ahead. At 2:19, another small shift, another jump. When it resumed, the phone was back, at the foot of the bed, placed exactly the same way. I sat there, staring at the screen. The room around me felt too quiet again, like something was missing from the sound. I played the clip one more time, watched those moments carefully. There was nothing in between, no motion, no figure, no sign of anything happening, just the frame slipping, time skipping, and the phone changing position between those gaps. Like whatever moved it wasn't there in the footage at all, only in the moments the camera couldn't capture. And whatever it wasn't just picking up the phone, it was placing it carefully in the exact same spot every time. I noticed it because the room wasn't completely dark. Not bright either. Just that faint, almost gray kind of darkness you get when there's a little ambient light from outside. Enough to make out shapes if you look long enough. I was lying on my back, staring up at the ceiling, not really thinking about anything. It was late, maybe around 2 a.m., and I'd been trying to fall asleep for a while without much luck. That's when I saw it, a thin line of light, right where the wall met the ceiling. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. You know how edges can look lighter or darker depending on how long you stare at them? But this was different. It was moving, slowly, not across the room, along the edge, like something was tracing the corner, inch by inch. I didn't move, just watched it. It wasn't bright, more like a soft glow, barely enough to stand out from the darkness, but clear enough that I could follow it. It started above the window, then moved toward the corner near the door. Steady, no flicker, no breaks, just this faint line sliding along the seam. I frowned slightly, trying to figure out where it could be coming from. There weren't any lights on outside that should hit that angle. The curtains were closed, no cars passing, and even if there were, the light would move differently. This was too controlled, too consistent. I shifted my eyes toward the window without moving my head. Nothing there, just darkness behind the curtain. I looked back at the ceiling edge. The line had moved further along, now above the door, still the same dim glow, still moving at the same slow pace. I started to feel a bit off. Not scared exactly, just aware, like something wasn't right, but I couldn't say why. I lifted my hand slightly, just enough to see if the light reacted. It didn't. It kept moving, unchanged. I let my hand drop back down. My breathing felt louder than it should. The room was completely silent otherwise. No ticking clock, no distant traffic, nothing. Just that faint glow moving along the edge. It reached the corner near the wardrobe, paused. Not for long, just a second. Then it started moving again, turning the corner and continuing along the next wall. That's when I pushed myself up. I didn't think about it, just reacted. As soon as I moved, the light faded. Not instantly, but quickly, like it was being dimmed. By the time I was fully sitting up, it was gone. The edge of the ceiling looked normal again, just a dark line against a slightly darker ceiling. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at where it had been. Nothing came back. I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. The room filled with warm light. Everything looked normal. Walls, ceiling, no marks, no reflections, nothing that could explain what I'd just seen. I got out of bed and walked over to the wall, ran my hand along the edge where the light had been. The surface felt the same as always. No warmth, no vibration. I checked the window, pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside was completely dark, no streetlights nearby, no passing cars. I stood there for a minute, just looking, then let the curtain fall back into place. I turned off the lamp and got back into bed. The room went dark again. I lay there, staring at the same spot, waiting. Nothing happened. After a while, I turned onto my side, trying to relax, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way it moved, the way it followed the edge so precisely, and the way it faded the moment I sat up. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I remember was waking up to my alarm. Morning light coming through the curtain. Everything normal. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Until that night. I was lying in the same position again, not even thinking about it anymore, just staring up at the ceiling. And after a while, I noticed something. Not the light, not yet. Just the edge. It looked slightly brighter, subtly, like my eyes were picking up something they hadn't before. I focused on it, and then that same faint glow, starting again, at the corner above the window, moving, slow, steady, exactly like before. I didn't move this time, didn't sit up, just watched it. My heart started beating faster. The room felt smaller somehow, quieter. The glow traced the edge again, same path, same pace. When it reached the corner near the wardrobe, it paused, just like before. But this time I didn't react. I stayed still, watching, waiting. The glow didn't fade, it stayed there for a second, two. Then it started moving again, along the next wall. And as it did, I noticed something else. The air felt different, not colder, just disturbed, like there was a slight movement I couldn't see. I swallowed, keeping my eyes fixed on the line. It kept tracing the edge, uninterrupted. When it reached the wall above my head, it slowed. Not by much, but enough that I could tell. I held my breath without meaning to. The glow continued, closer now, directly above me, and for a moment, it felt like it wasn't just following the edge, like it was aware of where I was. I stayed completely still, didn't even blink. The glow reached the point directly above my bed, paused again, longer this time. Then, without changing brightness, it slid forward a few inches, off the edge, onto the ceiling itself, just barely, like it was testing the surface. Then it pulled back, returned to the corner, and continued along the wall, away from me. I didn't move, didn't sit up, didn't turn on the light. I just watched it finish its path. It reached the far corner of the room, and then it faded, slowly, until it was gone. I lay there for a long time after that, not moving, just staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. But even now, when I lie in that same spot, I don't look at the center of the ceiling anymore. I watch the edges. Because whatever that light is, it doesn't move randomly. It follows something, a line, a boundary. And the only time it changed, the only time it didn't behave the same way, was when it got close enough that it didn't need the edge anymore. I saw it for maybe half a second. It wasn't even clear at first what I was looking at. My headlights hit something ahead on the road, and for a split second the light bent like it had caught on a curved surface, smooth, almost like glass. Then it was gone. No sound, no impact, nothing in the road. I kept driving another few seconds before I realized how weird that was. My name's Aaron. I was coming back from a late shift, driving through a stretch of road that cuts between farmland and low hills. It's the kind of road you don't think about. Just long, straight sections with the occasional bend, no streetlights, nothing but your headlights and whatever's in front of you. It was just after midnight, clear sky, no fog, no rain. I slowed down a little, looking ahead, trying to see if I'd missed something. There was nothing there. The road looked completely empty. I checked my mirrors, instinctively, like maybe I'd hit something and not felt it. Nothing behind me either. I kept going, but now I was paying attention. Every detail. The edges of the road, the hedges, the dips in the surface. About a minute later, I passed the spot where I thought I'd seen it. No debris, no animal, nothing reflective, just asphalt and grass. I told myself it was probably something small, maybe a piece of plastic or a bird that caught the light just right. That made sense, enough that I stopped thinking about it for a bit. Then it happened again. Same kind of thing. My headlights reached a little further ahead, and for a split second, that same curved distortion, like the beam had hit something invisible. This time, I reacted faster. I braked slightly, leaning forward trying to catch it again, but it was gone. Completely gone. The road ahead looked normal. I slowed down more this time. Not enough to stop traffic, there wasn't any, but enough that I could focus. I drove at maybe 20 miles an hour, scanning the space in front of the car. Nothing. Just darkness beyond the reach of the headlights. Then I noticed something else. The edges of the light didn't look right. Not constantly, just every now and then, like the beam itself was slightly uneven. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were tired. But the road markings looked fine. The hedges looked fine. It was just the far edge of the light, like something was interfering with it. I eased off the accelerator a bit more. The engine noise dropped. The car felt too quiet. That's when I heard it. A faint sound. Not loud. More like a low, steady tone. Almost like a distant hum. At first I thought it was the car, but it didn't match the engine. It didn't change when I adjusted my speed. It just stayed there. Constant. I turned off the radio completely, just in case. The hum was still there. I glanced up through the windshield. The sky looked normal, stars faint but visible, no clouds, no obvious source for the sound. I looked back at the road, and then it happened again, closer this time, right at the edge of the headlights. That same curved outline, clearer now, like a section of air had shape, smooth, rounded, catching the light just enough to reveal itself. Then it shifted, not across the road, upward, and disappeared. I hit the brakes harder this time. The car slowed to a near stop. I sat there, engine idling, staring ahead. Nothing. The road was empty, completely clear. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was cool, still. The hum was louder outside, not by much, but enough that I could tell it wasn't inside the car. I looked up again. Nothing. No lights, no movement. I turned slowly, scanning the area. Fields on either side, low hedges, no buildings nearby. The hum seemed to come from above, but there was nothing there. I stepped a little further away from the car. The gravel crunched under my shoes. The sound felt too sharp in the quiet. I looked back toward the road, trying to line up where I'd seen the distortion. Nothing. I raised my hand slightly, moving it through the air in front of me. It felt normal. No resistance. No change. I took a few more steps forward, closer to where the headlights were hitting, and then the hum changed. Just slightly. Not louder. Just different. Like the pitch shifted a fraction. I stopped moving. The hum steadied again. I took another step. It shifted again. I froze. The feeling that followed wasn't sudden. It built slowly, like something was just out of reach, something close. I looked up one more time, and for a split second I thought I saw it. Not clearly. Just a faint suggestion of shape. A curve, high above, barely visible. Then gone. The hum cut out instantly. Just silence. Complete silence. Even the distant background noise felt gone for a moment. I stood there, not moving, then slowly turned back toward the car. Got in, closed the door, sat there for a few seconds. The interior felt normal again. The engine sounded normal. I put the car in gear and started moving. I didn't speed up right away, just drove slowly, watching the road, the headlights, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't, not for the rest of the drive. Everything looked normal, but a few times I caught myself watching the edge of the beam, looking for that distortion, that curve. And the more I thought about it, the less it felt like something had been in front of the car. It felt more like I'd driven into something that didn't stay in place, something that only showed itself when the light hit it at the right angle. And once I passed through, it shifted out of view, like it wasn't fixed to the road, just moving through it, barely visible, unless you happen to be in exactly the right spot at exactly the right moment. I noticed it because the timestamp didn't line up with the sound. I'd been checking my security cameras after a package went missing earlier that week. Nothing serious, just something I ordered that showed as delivered but never showed up. So I pulled up the footage from the front camera to see if someone had grabbed it. My name's Aaron. I live in a pretty normal suburban area. Quiet street, mostly families, nothing unusual. I've got 2 cameras, one on the front door and one covering the driveway. It was late when I started going through the footage. around 10:30 at night. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, scrubbing through clips from earlier that day. Everything looked normal. Cars passing occasionally, neighbors walking their dogs. At one point, my neighbor Kyle came up to my porch around 3:12 p.m., dropped off a misdelivered letter, then left. I remember that happening. I kept going. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I switched to the driveway camera. That's when I saw it. At first, I didn't even register anything was wrong. Just a normal frame. The driveway, my car, the street beyond. But something about it felt off. I paused the video and looked closer. The image looked stretched, not dramatically, just slightly, like everything had been pulled outward for a split second. The car looked a little longer than it should have. The edges of the frame didn't quite line up right. It reminded me of when a video glitches and the frame doesn't render properly. I assumed it was just a recording error. But then I noticed the timestamp. It read 2:47:13 p.m. I clicked forward 1 frame, 6 seconds gone. No transition, no skipped playback, just missing. I frowned and went back, played it again. Same thing, normal frame, then the stretched one. Then it jumped ahead. I leaned closer to the screen, rewound a few seconds before the glitch. Everything looked fine, still, quiet. Then right before the stretched frame, I heard something, a low sound, barely there. Not loud enough to notice at first, like a distant hum. I turned up the volume and replayed it. There it was again, faint, steady, lasting maybe a second. Then the stretched frame hit, then silence. Then the timestamp jumped. I sat back a bit, trying to make sense of it. Camera glitch. That's all. Cheap hardware, maybe a buffering issue. I switched to the front door camera, same time. Scrolled to 2:47. Normal footage, no stretching, no skip time. But the audio caught something. Same faint hum. Just for a second, then gone. I went back to the driveway camera, watched the clip again. This time I paid attention to the edges of the frame. When the stretched image appeared, the sides of the picture seemed to ripple slightly. Not like a normal digital glitch, more like heat distortion. The kind you see over a road on a hot day, but it was brief, just that one frame. I paused on it and zoomed in. The image quality wasn't great, but I could see the distortion more clearly. The air above the driveway looked warped, like something had passed through it, or was sitting there, for that one instant. Then it was gone. I checked the rest of the footage from that afternoon. Nothing else like it. No other glitches, no skip time, just that one moment. I rubbed my face and leaned back, staring at the screen. Then something else hit me. The time, 2:47 p.m. I tried to remember what I was doing then. I was home that day, working from my desk in the spare room. I didn't remember anything unusual. No sounds, no interruptions. But I also couldn't clearly remember that exact time, which wasn't strange on its own. Most afternoons blur together. Still, something about it bothered me. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the driveway. It was dark outside now. Everything looked normal. Still, quiet. I went back to the laptop and rewound the clip again. Played it slowly, frame by frame. Just before the stretched image, there was a shadow. Not a full shadow, just a slight dimming, like the light had dipped for a fraction of a second. Then the distortion, then the jump. I stared at it for a long time, trying to see more, trying to catch something I missed. But there wasn't anything else, just that brief, warped moment. I closed the laptop eventually, telling myself it was just a glitch. Hardware issue, corrupt frame. It happens. But later that night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about it. Not just the image, the timing, the missing seconds, the hum, and the way the air looked in that one frame, like something had been there, not visible, but present enough to distort everything around it. I got up at some point and checked the footage again, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. It was still there, exactly the same frame, same jump, nothing changed. I stood in the hallway for a while, listening. The house was quiet, no hum, no movement, everything normal. But for a second, just standing there, I had this feeling. Like if I went back and checked again, at the exact right moment, I might catch something in between those frames. Something that wasn't supposed to be recorded, but still was. Just enough to leave a mark in a single stretched image and 6 missing seconds that I couldn't account for. I noticed it because it matched my steps too well. Click, click, click. Not loud. just soft enough that at first I thought it was my shoes hitting the pavement differently. But after a few seconds, I realized it wasn't lining up right. My foot would hit the ground. Then the click would come just after, consistently. I slowed down slightly. The clicking stayed the same rhythm, same spacing. My name's Lewis. I'd gone out for a walk later than usual that night. Couldn't sleep, so I felt restless, so I figured I'd just do a loop around the neighborhood. It's a quiet area, rows of houses, a small park, a few narrow streets with trees lining them. It was close to midnight, no wind, street lights on, but dim, the kind of night where everything feels still. I stopped walking. The clicking stopped too, immediately. I stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. No background noise, no cars, no distant voices, just silence. I took another step. Click. Another. Click. Same delay, same soft, clean sound. I frowned and looked down at my shoes. Just regular trainers. Nothing loose, nothing that should make that kind of noise. I lifted one foot and tapped it on the ground a few times. No click. Just the dull sound of rubber on concrete. I started walking again. The clicking came back, perfectly spaced, perfectly timed. Just slightly after each step, I kept moving, trying to ignore it. Maybe it was something echoing weirdly. Maybe sound bouncing off something behind me. But the timing didn't change. It didn't stretch or compress like an echo would. It stayed exact. I reached the corner of the street and turned right. The clicking followed. Same rhythm, same spacing. I glanced behind me. Nothing. Empty road, parked cars along the curb. No movement. I looked ahead again, took a few more steps. Click, click, click. I slowed down even more. The clicking didn't adjust. It kept its own pace, now slightly out of sync with me. That's when I felt it. Not a sound, more like a pressure. Above me, not strong. Just enough to make me aware of the space overhead. I stopped again. The clicking stopped. I stood still, looking straight ahead. My heart had started to pick up a little. I swallowed and tilted my head up. The moment I did, nothing. No clicking, no sound. Just the empty sky. I stood there for a few seconds, staring up. The streetlight above cast that usual dull glow. The branches of a tree nearby barely moved. Everything looked normal. I lowered my gaze, started walking again. Click, click, click. Back again. Same rhythm, same spacing. I felt a tightness in my chest now. Not panic, just that slow build of something not being right. I tried to match the sound, adjusted my pace, walked faster, then slower. The clicking didn't follow me. It stayed consistent, its own timing, its own rhythm. I stopped abruptly. The clicking stopped too. I didn't look up this time, just stood there, staring at the ground. Then I took one slow step forward. No click. Another step. Still nothing. A third. Click. I flinched slightly. It was back. I looked up again. Nothing. As soon as my eyes moved upward, the sound cut off. Clean. Instant. I lowered my gaze, waited. Took another step. Click. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. I started walking again, a bit faster now. The clicking followed. Always just after my steps, like something reacting to my movement, but not perfectly synced, close enough to notice, far enough to feel wrong. I reached the small park at the end of the street, open space. No houses immediately around, just a wide stretch of grass and a path cutting through it. The streetlights were further apart here, darker. I hesitated for a second, then kept going. As soon as I stepped onto the path, the clicking changed. Not in volume, in spacing. It got slightly faster, still even. Still precise, but quicker. I slowed down. The clicking didn't. Now it was clearly out of sync. Not following me anymore. Just continuing. Click, click, click. Steady. Unchanging. I stopped again. The clicking stopped instantly. I didn't move, didn't look up, just stood there. Then, without thinking too much about it, I took one step forward and immediately tilted my head up. Nothing. No sound. Empty sky. I lowered my gaze slowly, waited. Then took another step. Click. Back again. I felt a chill run through me. Not from the air, just that sudden awareness of something close, something just out of sight. I turned around, heading back the way I came. Walking faster now, the clicking kept up, same rhythm, same spacing, always just behind my steps. I didn't stop this time, didn't look up again, just kept moving. The closer I got to my street, the quieter everything felt. Even the clicking seemed softer, but still there. Still precise, still too regular. I reached my house and stepped onto the driveway. The clicking stopped, not faded, stopped. I stood there for a second, hand on the door, listening, nothing. I looked up one last time. The sky was clear, no movement, no sound. I went inside and locked the door, stood there in the hallway, listening again. Still nothing. Later, lying in bed, I kept thinking about the timing, the spacing, how consistent it was, not random, not like anything natural, and how it only happened when I was moving. Always just after each step, like something was following along above me, but only making a sound when I did, and stopping the moment I tried to look, like it wasn't meant to be seen, just heard, just enough to let you know it was there, as long as you kept walking. I noticed it because I'd already been staring at the same patch of sky for a while. It was one of those clear nights where you can actually see more than just the brightest stars. I'd driven out to a small hill just outside town, nothing dramatic, just a higher bit of ground with a dirt pull-off and a wide view in every direction. No streetlights nearby, barely any houses. My name's Daniel. I go out there sometimes when I can't sleep. Just sit on the hood of the car, look up, let things settle. It was late, around 1 a.m., cold enough that my breath showed a little, but not uncomfortable. I'd been tracking a constellation. Nothing fancy, just something familiar, so my eyes didn't wander too much. After a while, your vision kind of sharpens, and you start noticing smaller stars around it. That's when I saw the shift. It wasn't one star. It was a small cluster, maybe 5 or 6 of them. They moved together, not across the sky, just slightly out of place. Like someone had nudged them. It was subtle. If I hadn't been looking directly at them, I probably wouldn't have caught it. Then about a second later, they snapped back, exactly where they had been. I blinked a few times, trying to reset my vision. Sometimes your eyes do weird things in low light. Floaters, tiny movements that look bigger than they are. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The stars were steady, no movement. I exhaled slowly and leaned back on my hands, trying to relax again. Told myself it was nothing, just a trick of the eyes. I stayed there for a few more minutes, letting my gaze drift a little. Then I went back to the same spot, focused on the same cluster, waited. Nothing happened at first. Everything looked normal, still. Then, again, that same shift. This time I was ready for it. I saw it clearly. The whole group moved slightly to the right, not far, just enough that the pattern broke for a moment. Then it snapped back. Perfect alignment. I sat up a bit straighter, heart beating a little faster now. That wasn't my eyes. It couldn't be. I looked around the rest of the sky. Everything else was stable. No movement, no satellites passing through, no planes, just those stars. I focused on them again. Waited. The air felt colder now. Or maybe I was just more aware of it. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept watching. A minute passed. Nothing. Another minute. Still nothing. I started to feel a bit stupid, just sitting there waiting for it to happen again. Then I heard something. A faint sound. Not loud, not sharp. More like a low, distant hum. I froze, listened. It wasn't coming from the car. The engine had been off the whole time. It didn't sound like wind either. There was no movement in the trees. The hum stayed steady, barely noticeable. I looked back at the stars and it happened again. The cluster shifted. Same direction, same distance, then snapped back. This time, the hum changed slightly. Not louder, just a different tone, like it adjusted in response. I felt my chest tighten. I slid off the hood of the car and stood up, still looking at the sky. The ground beneath my boots felt solid, normal, but something about the air felt wrong, like it had weight. I took a few steps forward, moving away from the car. The hum stayed constant, the stars stayed still. I stopped moving. The hum didn't change. I looked back at the cluster, waited. Then, the shift happened again, but this time it lasted longer. The stars moved out of place and stayed there for maybe 2 seconds. Long enough that I could see the pattern clearly altered. Then they snapped back. The hum cut out instantly. Just silence. I stood there, not moving, not even blinking. The sky looked normal again. No movement, no distortion. I slowly turned in a circle, scanning the horizon. Nothing. No lights, no signs of anything nearby. I looked back up, focused on the same cluster, waited. Nothing happened. After a while, I let out a breath and walked back to the car, sat on the hood again, tried to convince myself it was something natural, atmospheric distortion, some kind of visual effect, but it didn't feel like that. It felt controlled, precise, the way the stars moved together, the way they snapped back into place. I stayed out there a bit longer, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I got back in the car and drove home. I didn't look up much on the way back, just focused on the road. Later, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it, not just the movement, but the timing. The way it only happened when I was looking directly at that spot and how the hum changed with it. It wasn't just the stars moving, like something between me and them, something I couldn't see, was shifting position just enough to distort what was behind it, then correcting itself as if it had been noticed and needed to go back to where it was supposed to be. I saw it because the water around it didn't move. I'd gone out early that morning, just before sunrise. There's a reservoir about 20 minutes from where I live, tucked between low hills and a bit of woodland. Nothing special, but it's quiet and you don't usually see anyone there that early. My name's Callum. I fish there maybe once or twice a month when I need to clear my head. It was cold that morning. Not freezing, but enough that there was a thin mist sitting over the surface of the water, the kind that drifts slowly, barely noticeable unless you really look at it. I set up on a small patch of bank near the far side, where it curves inward. Cast out, settled into the folding chair, and just watched the line. Everything felt normal. Birds starting up in the trees, light slowly coming in, that quiet shift from night to morning. I remember noticing how still the water was near me. Not completely flat, there were small ripples further out, but right where my line was, it looked calmer than the rest. I didn't think much of it, just assumed it was the way the wind was hitting the surface. I took a sip from my flask and looked down. That's when I saw the glow. At first, I thought it was just light from the sky reflecting weirdly, but it wasn't above the water, it was under it. Faint, circular, like a soft ring of pale light sitting just below the surface. It wasn't bright. If I hadn't been looking straight down, I probably wouldn't have seen it at all. I leaned forward a bit, squinting. The water above it was completely still, no ripples crossing through it. Just a smooth patch like glass. The rest of the reservoir kept moving slightly, but that one area stayed untouched. I set the flask down slowly, kept staring. The ring didn't expand or flicker. It just sat there, perfectly still. Then, after a few seconds, it started to contract. Slowly, the circle getting smaller, tighter, like something was pulling it inward. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Maybe something beneath the surface? A fish? But it didn't behave like that. No disturbance, no movement in the water itself. Just the light shrinking. I looked around briefly, half expecting someone else to be nearby, maybe shining something into the water, but there was no one, just empty shoreline and trees. I looked back down. The circle was smaller now. Still faint, still under the surface, still not lighting anything around it. The water above it stayed perfectly smooth. I noticed something else then. The sound, or lack of it. The birds had gone quiet, not all at once, just gradually, like the background noise had been turned down. I could still hear distant movement, but around me, it felt muted. I swallowed and shifted in my chair. The line in the water didn't move, nothing tugging at it. I stood up slowly and took a step closer to the edge. The ground was damp, slightly soft under my boots. The glow continued to shrink. Now about half the size it had been. I felt a slight pressure in my ears. Not painful, just that subtle shift, like when you're going up a hill too quickly. I swallowed again. The pressure stayed. I crouched down near the water, close enough to see through the surface more clearly. The glow looked deeper than I first thought. Not right under the surface, further down, but still clearly visible. The edges of the circle were smooth, too smooth, like it wasn't part of the water at all. Then it got smaller again, and smaller, until it was maybe the size of a dinner plate, then a bowl, then something like a coin. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I reached up and touched one ear like that would help. The air felt heavier, not thick, just off, like something was pressing down without weight. I remember thinking I should step back, but I didn't. I just watched. The glow kept contracting. Now just a small point, barely visible. Then it was gone. Not faded, just gone. The water above it changed instantly. The smooth patch broke. Ripples moved through it like nothing had been there. The birds started up again. The normal sounds came back, and the pressure in my ears disappeared. I stayed crouched there for a few seconds, waiting, watching. Nothing else happened. The surface looked completely normal. My line floated the same way it had before. I stood up slowly, backing away from the edge. Sat back down in the chair, tried to settle myself. I kept looking at the same spot for a while, half expecting it to come back, but it didn't. I packed up earlier than I planned, didn't catch anything, didn't really try after that. As I was leaving, I glanced back at the water one more time. Everything looked the same. Mist drifting, light coming up, no sign of anything unusual. But the way that circle moved, the way it didn't disturb the water, and how everything around it seemed to pause while it was there, it didn't feel like something happening in the lake. It felt like something passing through it, like the water just happened to be where it showed up for a moment before pulling itself back and leaving nothing behind except a patch of water that acted like it had never been touched at all. I saw it because it didn't light anything around it. That's what stuck out first. I was driving through a stretch of farmland just outside a small town I pass through for work sometimes. Narrow road, hedges on both sides, fields opening up here and there. It had been foggy for most of the drive. Nothing too thick, just a low layer sitting across the fields, drifting slowly with the wind. My name's Ethan. I'd left later than I should have, so it was already dark by the time I got out there. Maybe around 11:30. The kind of drive where you just focus on the road and let everything else blur out. I slowed down slightly when the fog got heavier. Headlights cutting through it in that usual way, bright beam, then soft scatter, then darkness again. That's when I noticed the glow. It wasn't ahead of me, not in the air. It was under the fog. That's the only way I can describe it. A faint, dull light, like something glowing beneath a thin layer of cloud. But it wasn't sky. It was low, close to the ground. I frowned, leaning forward a bit. At first I thought it might be a farmhouse light diffused by the fog, but it didn't behave like that. It didn't spread, didn't reflect. It just sat there, a small patch of dim brightness moving slowly along the field to my right. I eased off the accelerator. The car slowed. The glow kept moving, parallel to the road. Same pace. I glanced at the trees lining the field. The branches were swaying slightly. Wind was pushing the fog left to right. But the glow was moving the opposite way. I felt a small tightening in my chest. I adjusted my speed again, just to see. Slowed down more. The glow slowed too, still keeping that same distance from me. I looked straight ahead, then back to the side. Still there, still faint, still not lighting anything around it. The grass beneath it looked exactly the same. No shadows, no reflection, just that dim presence under the fog. I swallowed and rolled down the window slightly. Cold air came in. The usual night smells, damp soil, grass, and something else. Not a smell exactly, just a feeling in the air, like the temperature dropped a fraction. I listened. There was a sound, very faint, not loud enough to be sure at first, a low, steady tone, almost like something humming far away. I drove a little further, keeping pace with it. The glow drifted sideways through the field, weaving slightly but never changing its height, always under the fog, never breaking through it. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing behind me, just darkness and the faint line of road. I looked back at the field. The glow was still there. Then it shifted. Not faster, just changed direction slightly, cutting across the field now at an angle, still moving against the wind. The fog continued drifting one way. The glow moved another. I felt that pressure again, not physical, just awareness, like something was close, closer than it should be. I slowed the car almost to a crawl. The glow slowed too. Keeping that same distance, I stared at it, trying to make out a shape, anything. But there was nothing solid, no edges, just a soft, diffused light. Then for a second, it brightened. Not by much, just enough that I could see a faint outline around it. Not a clear shape, just a suggestion. Rounded. Smooth. Then it dimmed again. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. The hum grew slightly louder. Still faint. Still steady. I came to a near stop. The car idled quietly. The glow stopped moving. Held its position. I held mine. We just stayed like that. Then I did something I didn't think through. I opened the door, stepped out. The cold hit me harder outside. The fog hung low across the field, barely moving. The glow sat beneath it. Still, the hum was clearer now. Not coming from a direction, just present. I took a step toward the field. The grass at the edge of the road was wet, brushing against my shoes. The glow didn't move. I took another step. The hum shifted slightly, higher pitch. I stopped. The glow reacted. Not moving away, just sliding sideways a few feet, still under the fog, still not lighting anything. I felt something in my ears. Not a full pressure change, just that slight sensation, like altitude shifting. I swallowed. The feeling stayed. I took another step. The glow moved again. Same distance, same reaction, like it was adjusting to me, keeping space. I stopped walking. The glow stopped too. The hum steadied. I stood there breathing slowly, watching it. Then, without warning, it moved. Fast. Not toward me. Across the field, cutting through the fog in a smooth, gliding motion. No sound change. No disturbance in the grass. Just that dim light sliding beneath the surface. I turned to follow it. It moved further away. Then, it was gone. Not faded. Gone. 1 second it was there. The next, nothing. The fog drifted normally again. The field looked empty. The hum cut out instantly. Just silence. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process it. Then slowly walked back to the car. Got in. Closed the door. The interior felt too still, too normal. I sat there for a moment, staring out at the field. Nothing moved. Nothing lit up, just darkness and fog. I pulled back onto the road and drove. Didn't look back again, but every now and then as I went further down the road, I glanced at the fields on either side, half expecting to see that same faint glow. Not above the fog, not in the sky, but under it. Moving in a way that didn't match anything around it. Like it wasn't part of the land at all, just passing through, just low enough to be hidden, unless you happen to be in the right place at the right time, with the light hitting it just enough to notice something that shouldn't have been there in the first place. I noticed it because it didn't stop when I turned everything off. It started late, sometime after midnight. I'd been in the living room, TV on low, just scrolling on my phone. Nothing unusual, normal night. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the fridge or something electrical. Just a low hum, steady, easy to ignore. But after a minute or two, I realized it wasn't coming from the kitchen. It felt higher, not loud, just present, like it was sitting above the ceiling. My name's Marcus. I live in a small semi-detached house, nothing fancy. Old enough that it creaks sometimes, pipes make noise, all that normal stuff. So I didn't think much of it at first. I muted the TV. The hum stayed. I stood up and walked into the hallway, listening more carefully. It wasn't moving, didn't shift when I moved around. It just filled the space. Low, steady, almost like a distant engine idling somewhere far away. I went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it again. Same hum. No change. I turned off the main light and stood there for a second. Still there. I looked up at the ceiling without really thinking about it. The sound felt like it was directly above me. Not coming through the walls, not echoing, just there. I grabbed a chair and stood on it, pressing my ear lightly against the ceiling. The sound got slightly clearer. Not louder exactly, just more defined. A smooth tone. No vibration I could feel. Just sound. I climbed back down slowly. That's when I noticed something else. The house felt quiet in a different way. Not silent, just like the usual background noise had dropped out. No distant traffic, no pipes clicking, just that hum. I walked into the front room again and picked up my phone, checking the time. 12:38 a.m. I don't know why I checked. It just felt like something I should note. I stood there for a bit longer, listening. Then I did what anyone would probably do. I stepped outside. As soon as I opened the front door, the sound stopped. Completely. Not faded. Gone. The sudden silence felt sharp, like stepping into a different place. I stood on the porch for a second, expecting maybe to still hear something faint. But there was nothing. Just the normal night sounds. Distant cars, a dog barking somewhere far off, the usual stuff. I stepped further out onto the path, looking up at the roof. Nothing. No lights, no movement. Everything looked normal. I walked a few steps down the driveway, listening carefully. Still nothing. I even held my breath for a second, just to be sure I wasn't missing it. Silence. I went back inside. The moment I closed the door, the hum came back. Same level. Same tone, like it had been waiting. I froze for a second, hands still on the handle, then slowly turned around. The house looked exactly the same. Nothing out of place. But the sound filled the space again. I walked further in, moving room to room. It was everywhere. Not louder in one spot, not quieter in another, just constant. I went upstairs. The hum stayed with me. Same volume, same presence. I stood in the bedroom, listening. Then I noticed something else. The air felt slightly off. Not colder, not warmer, just still. Too still. I went to the window and opened it slightly. Cool air came in. The hum didn't change. I leaned out a bit, listening outside again. Nothing. No hum. Pulled back in, there it was again. I shut the window and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to think, trying to find a normal explanation. Electrical issue. Something in the attic. But the house didn't have much up there, just insulation and some old boards, no equipment, no machinery. I stood up again and walked back into the hallway. The ceiling above me creaked slightly, normal sound, but the hum stayed steady beneath it, like it didn't interact with anything, just existed over it. I grabbed a torch and pulled down the attic hatch. The ladder creaked as it unfolded. The hum didn't change. I climbed up slowly, each step loud in the quiet. As soon as my head cleared the opening, the hum softened. Not completely gone, just reduced. I paused halfway up listening. Below me, inside the house, it was louder. Above me in the attic space, it was quieter. That didn't make sense. I climbed fully into the attic, shined the torch around. Nothing unusual. Just insulation, beams, dust. No movement, no light, no source. The hum was faint up there, barely noticeable. I climbed back down. As soon as I dropped into the hallway again, it was strong, exactly as before. I stood there trying to process that. Then something else happened. The tone shifted, just slightly. Not a different sound, just a change in pitch. Subtle, but enough that I noticed I held still. The hum stayed at that new pitch for a few seconds, then slowly drifted back to what it had been. Like it adjusted. I felt a tightness in my chest. Not panic, just awareness. Like something was responding. I stepped back toward the front door again. The hum stayed constant. I opened it. Silence. Stepped outside. Nothing. I turned around immediately and went back in. The hum returned the second the door closed. Same as before. I stayed inside after that, didn't go back upstairs, didn't check the attic again. Just sat in the living room, listening. The sound didn't change, didn't move, it just stayed there. Eventually, sometime after 2 a.m., I must have fallen asleep on the couch. When I woke up, it was gone. Morning light coming through the window. Normal house sounds back. Everything felt ordinary again. I checked the attic once more in daylight. Nothing. No sign anything had been there. But sometimes now, late at night, I catch myself listening, waiting for that same low hum. Not because it was loud, not because it was obvious, but because of how it behaved. Like it wasn't coming from the house at all, just occupying the space inside it and stopping the moment I stepped out, as if whatever made it never crossed the threshold. I noticed it because the fire stopped moving. I'd been camping alone for 2 nights already, about a mile off a trail in a stretch of woodland I'd been to a few times before. Nothing remote enough to be dangerous, but far enough that you don't hear roads or see lights once it gets dark. My name's Lewis. I go out there to get away from everything. No signal, no noise, just trees and whatever you bring with you. That night was colder than I expected. Not freezing, but the kind of cold that creeps in once the sun's been down a while. I had a small fire going in front of the tent, just enough to keep some warmth and light. It was late, probably around midnight. I was sitting on a low camping stool, just watching the fire burn down. Not really thinking about anything. Just listening to the usual night sounds, wind in the branches, the occasional rustle deeper in the woods, distant animal movement. Everything felt normal. Then it didn't. It wasn't sudden at first, just quieter. The wind dropped. I didn't notice it right away, but after a few seconds I realized the trees weren't moving anymore. No rustling, no shifting branches, just still. I looked up, expecting maybe the wind had just died down naturally, but it felt different, too complete. The fire caught my attention next. The flames were still there, but they weren't moving the way they should. They flickered, but slower, like the air around them had thickened. I leaned forward slightly, frowning. That's when I felt it. The air. It wasn't just still. It felt heavy. Not like humidity, not like pressure exactly, just dense, like every breath took a bit more effort. I inhaled slowly. The air felt colder than before, but not in a normal way. It didn't move, didn't flow. It just sat there. I stood up from the stool, my boots pressed into the ground with a dull, damp sound that seemed louder than it should have been. Every movement felt exaggerated, like the space around me wasn't reacting the way it normally does. I turned in a slow circle. The trees stood completely still, branches frozen in place. Even the smallest leaves weren't moving. The fire gave off light, but it didn't seem to spread as far, like it was being absorbed. I took a step away from the fire, then another. Something about it made me want distance. I don't know why. I just felt like I shouldn't be right next to it. That's when I saw the shimmer. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the dark. A slight distortion between the trees about 10 feet in front of me, like heat rising off pavement. But there was no heat. The air there looked wrong, bent, not sharply. Just enough that the shapes of the trees behind it didn't line up properly. I squinted, trying to focus on it. The shimmer moved, not fast, just a slow drift sideways, passing between two trees. As it moved, the space behind it warped slightly. Branches looked offset, lines didn't connect the way they should. It didn't glow, didn't reflect light. It was just a shift in how things looked, like something transparent was moving through the space. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The shimmer continued drifting, smooth, controlled. Not like wind, not like anything natural I'd seen before. It passed over a patch of ground where some leaves were scattered. The leaves didn't move, didn't react at all. Just sat there as the distortion moved across them. The fire behind me made a soft crack. I flinched slightly. The shimmer paused, not completely, but enough that I noticed, like it reacted to the sound. I held my breath. The air felt thicker now, harder to pull in. I didn't dare move. The shimmer shifted direction, slightly toward me, not directly, just enough to close some of the distance. I could see it more clearly now. Still not a shape. Not really, but the distortion had a kind of boundary, a soft edge, like something occupying space. I felt a pressure in my ears, subtle, but there. The same kind of sensation you get when a storm rolls in. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. The shimmer drifted closer, then stopped, just a few feet away. I couldn't see anything solid, but I knew exactly where it was, because everything behind it looked wrong, bent, offset, like the world was slightly misaligned in that one spot. I didn't know what to do. Moving felt wrong. Staying still felt worse. Then, just as slowly as it had come, it moved again. Not toward me. Away. Sliding past the trees, the distortion shifted across trunks and branches, bending them as it passed. Then it reached the edge of the clearing and kept going, into the darker part of the woods. I watched until I couldn't see it anymore. The moment it disappeared, everything snapped back. The wind returned, leaves rustled. The fire flared slightly, moving normally again. The air felt lighter, easier to breathe. The pressure in my ears vanished. It all happened at once, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there for a long time, just listening, trying to convince myself it had been something explainable, but nothing fit. Nothing I knew behaved like that. I didn't sleep much that night. Stayed close to the fire, adding wood more often than I needed to. Every now and then, I'd look out into the trees, half expecting to see that distortion again, but it never came back. In the morning, everything looked completely normal. Same trees, same ground, no sign anything had passed through, but I kept thinking about how the air felt, how the fire moved, and how that shimmer didn't push anything aside, didn't disturb anything. It just passed through, like it wasn't part of the same space, just overlapping it for a moment, long enough for me to notice, before slipping back out and leaving everything exactly as it was. I woke up already aware of it. Not the room, not the time, just the feeling. Like someone had been standing there, close enough to see me clearly, and had only just stepped away. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, eyes open, staring at the dark shape of the ceiling. My heart was already going faster than it should have been for someone who'd just woken up. My name's Oliver. I live alone in a small house on the edge of a village. Nothing remote, but quiet enough at night that you notice when something's off. And something felt off. I kept listening. The house was silent. No pipes, no distant cars, nothing outside. Even the usual low hum of the fridge downstairs didn't seem to carry up. I turned my head slightly toward the window. That's when I noticed the warmth. It wasn't strong, just subtle, like the air near the glass was a little warmer than the rest of the room. At first I thought maybe the heating had kicked on, but I could still feel the cool air everywhere else. Only the window felt different. I pushed myself up onto one elbow, still looking toward it. The curtains were half drawn. I always leave a gap so some light can come through in the morning. But it wasn't morning. It was still dark outside. No streetlights on that side of the house, just open space and a field. I swung my legs off the bed and sat there for a second, letting my eyes adjust. The warmth didn't go away. If anything, it became more noticeable as I focused on it. I stood up slowly and took a few steps toward the window. The floor creaked under my weight, normal, familiar sounds, but they felt too loud in the quiet. I reached out and hovered my hand near the glass. Warm. Not hot, not even close. Just warmer than it should have been, especially for the middle of the night. I pressed my fingertips lightly against it. The glass felt smooth, normal, but the temperature difference was real. I frowned, pulling my hand back slightly. Then I noticed something else. There was no condensation. On a night like that, with the inside warmer than outside, there's usually at least a bit of fogging on the glass, but it was completely clear. I leaned closer, trying to see out. The darkness beyond the window felt deeper than it should have been. Not just the usual night. Something about it looked flat, like there wasn't any depth. No variation, just a uniform darkness sitting right up against the glass. I shifted slightly, trying to change the angle. The view didn't change much, still that same flat black. I stepped back a little. The warmth remained. I glanced around the room. Everything else looked normal. Bed, dresser, door, nothing out of place. But the feeling hadn't gone away. That sense that someone had been there, watching. Close enough to see me breathe. I took another step toward the window. This time I reached for the handle. Paused. Something about opening it felt like a bad idea. Not in a dramatic way. Just a quiet, steady feeling that I shouldn't. I stood there for a few seconds, hand hovering. Then I pulled it back. Decided against it. Instead, I leaned closer to the glass again, trying to see past my own reflection. That's when I noticed the faint change. Not outside. On the surface itself. A slight distortion. Like the air just beyond the glass wasn't sitting right. I blinked and leaned in further. The distortion shifted. Barely. Like heat rising off something. Except there was no light, no source. Just that subtle bending. My reflection wavered slightly as I moved. I lifted my hand again, this time not touching the glass, just holding it close. The warmth increased slightly near my palm. I froze. The distortion moved again. Slow, controlled, not random. It slid across the surface of the window, following the line of my hand. I pulled my hand back. The distortion paused, then slowly drifted away. My chest tightened. I took a step back from the window. The warmth didn't follow. It stayed concentrated near the glass. I stood there, watching. The distortion faded, or maybe it just became too subtle to see. I wasn't sure. After a minute, I turned away, went back to the bed, sat down. The feeling lingered, not as strong as before, but still there, like something had just left or moved further away. I lay back down slowly, keeping my eyes on the window. The warmth stayed for a while. I could still feel it from across the room. Then, gradually, it faded. The air cooled. Everything returned to normal, but I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at that gap in the curtains, watching the darkness outside, waiting for it to shift again. And even when the room felt completely normal, when the temperature evened out, I couldn't shake the sense that whatever had been there hadn't gone far, just far enough that I couldn't see it anymore, but close enough that if I got up and went back to the window at exactly the wrong moment, I might catch that distortion again, right up against the glass, where something had been, watching me before I woke up. I noticed it because it wasn't lighting the road. I was driving back from a late shift, cutting through a stretch of back roads I don't usually take unless I'm tired and just want something quiet. It runs between open fields for a few miles, no houses, no streetlights, just hedges, narrow lanes, and whatever you bring with you in the headlights. My name's Ryan. It was around 2 a.m. and the fog had rolled in heavier than I expected. Not thick enough to stop, but enough that everything beyond the beams felt soft and undefined. I slowed down a bit, letting the car crawl along. The road curved gently ahead, disappearing into that pale wall of fog. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was just something reflecting back at me. A road sign, maybe. But it wasn't fixed. It hovered, low to the ground, just above the surface of the road, or maybe slightly off to the side. I couldn't tell at first. It was dim, not bright enough to cast shadows, just a dull, pale glow. I squinted, leaning forward slightly, trying to make sense of it. The weird part was how it didn't interact with anything. The hedges on either side stayed dark. The road didn't brighten around it. It was just there, floating. I kept driving, slowly. The fog shifted in soft waves, moving across the beam of my headlights. But the light didn't move with it. It held its position. Then, as I got closer, it drifted, not away, not toward me, sideways, sliding along the edge of the road, keeping roughly the same distance. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. I checked the rearview mirror quickly, nothing behind me, just darkness and fog swallowing the road. I looked forward again. The light was still there, same dull glow, still hovering. I eased off the accelerator more, almost coasting now. The engine noise dropped. And that's when I noticed something else. The sound inside the car changed. Not the engine, not the tires, just quieter, like the outside noise had been dampened. I cracked the window slightly. Cold air came in, carrying that usual damp smell of fog and soil, but it felt still. No wind, no movement. I listened carefully. No distant cars, no rustling, just a kind of muted silence. I looked back at the light. It had shifted again, now slightly further off the road, hovering over what I assumed was the edge of a field. Still low, still dim. I slowed the car almost to a stop. I don't know why. Part of me just wanted to see what it would do. I stopped completely. The car idled quietly. The headlights pointed straight at the fog ahead. The light remained off to the side, hovering. I watched it. It didn't flicker, didn't pulse, just stayed steady. Then slowly, it started to fade, not move, just lose brightness, like someone turning down a dimmer switch. I leaned forward again, trying to keep it in sight. It got fainter, still there, still hovering. Then the fog shifted slightly, a thicker patch drifted across. For a second, the light looked distorted, like it bent around the fog. Then, it was gone, not behind the fog. Gone. The space where it had been was just empty gray. I sat there, staring at that spot, waiting for it to come back. Nothing happened. The silence broke gradually, a faint rustle somewhere, the distant hum of something far off. Normal sounds creeping back in. I stayed parked for a minute longer, then two. My hands rested on the steering wheel, not moving. Eventually, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and put the car back in gear. Started driving again. As I passed the spot where the light had been, I slowed slightly, glancing out to the side. The field looked normal, flat, dark, fog drifting across it. No glow, no movement, just empty. I kept driving. The road straightened out for a bit. The fog thinned slightly. Everything looked more normal again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. Not a reflection, not a light source. Something occupying that space, just above the ground, moving in a way that didn't match anything around it. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. Didn't see anything else like it. But every now and then, when I hit another patch of fog on that same road, I catch myself slowing down without thinking. Watching the edges of the headlights, looking for that same dim glow, not above the road, not in the sky, but low, just out of reach, waiting to drift into view and disappear again before I can figure out what it actually was. I noticed it because it flashed too clean. I was driving home late, taking a route that cuts across a long stretch of open land. Not quite farmland, more like scrub and uneven ground with scattered fences. There's nothing out there for miles, no houses, no streetlights, just the road and whatever your headlights catch. My name's Darren. It was just after midnight, and the air was dry and cold. No fog, no clouds, clear sky. The kind of night where you can see stars properly if you're not focusing on the road. I'd been driving for about 20 minutes without seeing another car, just steady, quiet driving. Then it happened. For a split second, my headlights caught something above the road. Not directly ahead, higher, way higher than they should reach. It wasn't bright, just a quick, sharp reflection, like light hitting polished metal. I blinked hard, instinctively, trying to catch it again. But it was gone. I slowed down slightly, glancing up through the windshield. Nothing. Just sky. Stars scattered across it like normal. I kept driving, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a bird, maybe something on a wire catching the light. But there were no wires out there, and it didn't move like anything I'd seen before. I drove another minute or so, then it happened again. This time off to the left. Same kind of reflection. Quick, clean, but longer than the first. Long enough that I saw the shape, not clearly, just a smooth curve, like the edge of something rounded. Then it tilted, slightly, and shot upward, gone instantly. Not fading, not disappearing into distance, just gone. I felt my hands tighten on the wheel. I slowed the car more, now doing maybe half the speed I had been. My eyes kept drifting upward, trying to catch it again. The road stretched ahead, empty. The sky looked the same. Still, normal. I told myself it had to be something simple, a plane, but there were no blinking lights, no sound, and it moved too fast, way too fast. I rolled the window down slightly, letting the cold air in. The outside was quiet, no distant engines, no wind, just that empty kind of silence you get in open places at night. I kept driving, slow, watching. Then I noticed something else. The air above the road looked off. Not in a clear way, just slightly distorted, like heat haze, but there was no heat. It sat high up, almost invisible unless you were looking directly at it. I squinted, trying to focus. As I did, the reflection happened again, right in that distorted area, a flash of that same metallic surface. For a fraction of a second, I saw more of it. A smooth, curved underside, no edges, no details, just a shape that didn't look like anything I recognized. Then it tilted again, and this time I saw the movement clearly. Upward. Fast. Gone before I could even track it. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The distortion above the road faded, or maybe I just lost sight of it. I wasn't sure. I kept driving, eyes flicking between the road and the sky, half expecting it to happen again. Minutes passed. Nothing. The road continued straight, then curved slightly. Still no other cars, still no signs of anything unusual. But the feeling stayed, that something had been there, not passing through like a plane, not distant, closer, close enough that my headlights could catch it. I slowed almost to a stop. The car idled quietly. I leaned forward, looking up through the windshield again. The sky looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at the wrong place. Like whatever it was had been sitting just outside of where I expected it to be. I turned off the engine. The silence hit harder. No hum, no vibration, just stillness. I stepped out of the car slowly. The ground crunched under my shoes. I looked up. Nothing. Stars, clear and steady. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the sky. Still nothing. Then I heard it, or felt it. A faint shift in the air. Not a sound exactly, more like pressure moving. I looked straight up, and for a second, I saw it. Not clearly, just the outline. A faint curved shape against the stars. So subtle it almost wasn't there. Then the stars behind it shifted slightly, just enough to give it away. The shape tilted, same motion as before, and then it shot upward, gone instantly. No trail, no sound, just empty sky again. I stood there, staring up, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My chest felt tight, not from fear exactly, just from the effort of trying to understand it. After a while, I got back into the car, started the engine. The sound felt too loud now, out of place. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. Didn't see anything else. But every now and then, when I drive that same road at night, I find myself glancing up more than I should. Not looking for lights, not looking for movement, just watching the sky for that brief, clean reflection that shouldn't have been possible. From something that high, that moved the way it did, like it was only visible when the angle was just right, and then gone, before you could ever really be sure you saw it at all. I noticed it because my shadow looked wrong. Not gone, not stretched or distorted like when a car passes by. It was just sharper, too sharp for the kind of light that was around. I was walking home from a late shift, cutting through a quiet residential area to save time. My name's Aaron. I'd done that route plenty of times, so I wasn't paying much attention to anything except getting back and getting some sleep. It was just after midnight. The streetlights were spaced out, some brighter than others, and a few of them flickered slightly like they always did. Nothing unusual. I remember stepping under one of the lights and glancing down out of habit. That's when I saw it. My shadow was darker than it should have been, not by a huge amount, but enough to stand out. The edges looked clean, like it had been cut out and placed on the pavement. Normally, shadows under those lights look soft around the edges, kind of blurred. This one wasn't. I slowed down, staring at it as I walked. For a few steps, it stayed like that, sharp, defined. Then it softened again, back to normal. I stopped walking, looked down at where I'd just been. Nothing. Just the usual dim shadow from the streetlight. I shrugged it off at first, figuring maybe I just caught a different angle of light or something. It didn't seem like a big deal. I kept walking. The next street was quieter. Fewer houses, longer stretches between lights. There were patches where you were almost completely in the dark. As I moved into one of those darker sections, I felt something shift. Not in a dramatic way, just a slight change in the air, like it got still. I slowed again, listening. No cars, no wind, nothing. Then I stepped into the next pool of light, and there it was again. My shadow snapped into that same sharp outline, darker than the pavement around it, crisp edges, like it didn't belong to the light above me. I stopped immediately. The shadow stopped too, right in front of me. I shifted my weight slightly. It moved with me, but the edges stayed the same, too clean, too defined. I looked up at the streetlight. It looked normal. Same dull yellow glow, no flicker, nothing different. I looked back down. The shadow was still sharp. I took a step forward, then another. It stayed like that for maybe 5 or 6 steps. Then, without any change in the light above me, it softened again. Back to normal. I felt a bit uneasy then. Not scared, exactly, just confused. I turned around and walked back a few steps, retracing where I'd been. The shadow didn't change, just a regular, blurry outline. I turned again and continued home. A bit slower now, paying more attention. The next stretch was darker again. I moved through it quickly, wanting to get back under a light. As I stepped into the next lit area, I looked down immediately. Normal shadow. I kept walking. Still normal. I started to think maybe it had just been a weird angle before. Maybe something reflecting off a window or a parked car. But there weren't any cars nearby, and the houses were set back far enough that their windows didn't cast anything onto the pavement. I was about halfway down the block when something else happened. I stepped into another pool of light, and this time the shadow didn't just sharpen, it lagged, just slightly. I moved my foot forward. For a split second, the shadow stayed behind, then snapped into place. I froze, looked straight down. The shadow was back in sync now, normal shape, normal edges. I moved my hand slowly, watching it. It followed perfectly, no delay. I took another step, same thing, everything lined up. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. Then I stepped again, nothing, no lag. I exhaled slowly, told myself I was just tired. Seeing things, I started walking again, a bit faster now. The rest of the street was lit unevenly, some lights brighter, some dimmer. I kept checking my shadow as I moved. Everything seemed normal, until the last stretch before my road. There's a long section there with only one streetlight in the middle. I stepped into it, and the shadow snapped sharp again, darker than before, more defined. I stopped immediately. This time it didn't soften, it stayed like that. I looked up again. The light above me looked exactly the same as all the others, but the shadow didn't match it. I took a step forward. The shadow followed. Still sharp. I took another step. Same thing. I felt that same stillness in the air, like everything had quieted down again. I listened. Nothing. No distant cars, no wind. I looked back down. The shadow seemed heavier, not physically, just darker, more solid. I took another step, and for a moment, just a moment, it moved before I did. A fraction of a second, like it anticipated the movement. Then it snapped back into place. I stopped completely. My heart started beating faster. I didn't move, just stared at it. The shadow stayed still, perfectly aligned with me, but the edges were still too sharp, too clean. I waited. Nothing changed. After a few seconds, I forced myself to move again. One step, the shadow followed normally, edges still sharp. Another step, same thing. Then, as I reached the edge of the light, it softened, just like before. Back to a normal, blurry outline. The air shifted again. Sound returned. A car passed somewhere far off. I didn't stop walking after that. I went straight home, didn't look back. When I got inside, I stood in the hallway for a minute, looking down at the floor. The light there was bright and even. My shadow looked completely normal. I moved my hands, shifted my weight. Everything matched perfectly. But now, every time I walk home at night, I catch myself watching the ground more than anything else. Not the street, not the houses, just the shadow. Waiting for it to sharpen again, or fall out of sync, even for a second, like it did that night, when it felt like it wasn't just following me, but almost moving on its own. I noticed it because my ears popped. I was just standing in the backyard, nothing unusual. It was late, maybe a little after 10, and I'd stepped out to take a call because the signal inside my house drops sometimes. The call had already ended, but I stayed out there for a bit, just leaning against the fence, looking up. My name's Nathan. My name's Nathan. I live in a quiet area, not rural exactly, but far enough out that the sky's pretty clear on most nights. It was cold, dry, and still. No wind, no clouds. You could see a decent spread of stars. I remember thinking it was unusually quiet. Not silent, but the kind of quiet where you can hear small things, distant cars, a dog barking a few streets over. Then, out of nowhere, I felt the pressure, both ears at once, that familiar, uncomfortable shift like when you're on a plane. I swallowed automatically. It didn't fix it. I tilted my head slightly, trying to clear it. Still there. I looked around, half expecting some kind of explanation. A plane overhead, maybe. Something that would cause a change like that. But there was no sound. Nothing in the sky that stood out. I rubbed one ear, then the other. The pressure stayed steady. Not painful, just present. Then I saw the light. It wasn't obvious at first, just a small point moving slowly across the sky. At first I thought it was a satellite. It moved in a straight line, no blinking, no change in brightness. But something about it felt off. I narrowed my eyes, focusing on it. The motion was too smooth, not like something orbiting, more like it was gliding. And it was lower. Not way up where satellites usually are. Closer. I couldn't judge the exact height, but it felt like it was sitting somewhere between the stars and the horizon. I shifted my stance, keeping my eyes on it. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed again. Still didn't clear. The light kept moving. Slow, steady. No sound, no flicker, just a constant dim glow. Then it paused, not completely, but it slowed down noticeably, like something easing to a stop. I frowned, watching it. That's when I realized the rest of the sky looked normal. Stars steady, no movement. But around the light, there was something subtle, a slight distortion, barely noticeable, like the air itself was bending. I stepped away from the fence, moving a bit closer to the middle of the yard. The grass felt damp under my shoes. The light didn't react. It just hung there. The pressure in my ears shifted again. A little sharper this time. I winced slightly. Then, without any warning, the light started moving again. Different direction. Not turning like a plane would, just shifting. Like it changed course instantly. No curve, no arc, just a new path. I felt my chest tighten. I kept watching it, trying to track every movement. It drifted slowly, almost lazily. But there was something controlled about it. Deliberate. It stopped again. The pressure in my ears peaked. I swallowed hard. It didn't help. For a second, I had the strange feeling that the sound around me had dropped, like everything had been turned down slightly. Not silent, just muted. I glanced around the yard. Nothing had changed, but it felt different. I looked back up. The light brightened slightly. Not a lot, just enough that it stood out more clearly. Then it dimmed again. The distortion around it shifted, like a ripple passing through. I took a step back without thinking. The light moved again, this time faster. Still silent, still smooth. It crossed a section of sky quickly, then slowed again. I tried to follow it, turning my head slightly. That's when the pressure in my ears suddenly released. Both at once, like something had snapped back into place. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. The sound around me returned fully. Distant noise, subtle wind, normal. I looked back up. The light was still there, but now it was moving upward, slow at first, then faster. And then it was gone. Not fading, not disappearing into distance, just gone. The spot where it had been looked empty. I stood there for a long time, staring at the same patch of sky, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. The rest of the night felt normal again. No more pressure, no more distortion, just a quiet backyard under a clear sky. I stayed out there longer than I should have, trying to convince myself it had been something ordinary. A satellite, a drone, anything. But none of it matched. Not the way it moved, not the way it changed direction, and definitely not the way my ears reacted. I went back inside eventually, closed the door. The house felt normal, warm, still. But every now and then, when I step outside at night, I catch myself pausing for a second, waiting for that pressure to come back. Because it didn't feel like something passing overhead. It felt like something passing close enough that whatever it was affected more than just what I could see. The power went out without any warning. I was in the kitchen when it happened, just rinsing a mug. No flicker, no dimming. Everything just cut at once. The hum of the fridge, the overhead light, even the little clock on the microwave went dead in the same instant. My name's Stefan. I live in a coastal town, nothing too remote, but storms roll in fast sometimes. So at first, I just assumed it was weather. But there wasn't any. I stood there for a second, waiting for that usual follow-up, wind picking up, rain starting something. Nothing came. The house felt too quiet. Not just because the electricity was gone. It was like the outside had gone quiet too. No cars, no distant sounds, not even the low background noise you don't normally notice until it disappears. I dried my hands and walked to the front room. The windows looked darker than they should have been. Normally, even at night, there's some kind of glow from street lights or houses down the road, but this was just flat darkness. I grabbed my phone off the table, no signal, not even a flicker of it, trying to connect. That was the first thing that made me pause. Power cuts happen. Losing signal at the exact same time doesn't, at least not where I live. I moved toward the front door and opened it. The air outside was still. Not cold, not warm, just still. The street was completely dark. No porch lights, no passing headlights, nothing. Every house looked dead. I stepped out onto the path and looked up. That's when I saw it. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. There was a faint glow in the clouds. Not spread out like normal light, not coming from a single point either. It was a ring, a soft circular shape just barely visible against the low cloud cover. It wasn't bright. If anything, it was more like the clouds inside the circle were slightly lighter than the ones around it. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. It didn't move, didn't expand, just sat there, perfectly still. I stepped further out into the street. The ground felt slightly damp under my shoes, but there was no rain falling. I kept my eyes on the ring. It was hard to judge the size. It could have been huge. It felt like it stretched across a big portion of the sky, but without anything to compare it to, I couldn't tell. I looked around, expecting to see someone else outside. A neighbor, maybe. But every house was dark. No movement anywhere. I listened. Nothing. No wind through the trees, no distant engines, just that quiet pressing in from all sides. I looked back up. The ring was still there, unchanged. I took a few steps down the road, trying to get a different angle. It didn't matter. It looked exactly the same, centered, still. The clouds around it drifted slightly, but the shape of the ring didn't shift with them. It stayed fixed, like it wasn't part of the clouds at all. I felt something in my ears, a slight pressure, like when you're in an elevator and it moves too fast. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I stood there breathing slowly, trying to stay calm. The ring didn't react to anything. It didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just existed. Then, after what felt like a long time, though it couldn't have been more than a minute or two, it started to fade. Not expand, not move, just dim. The contrast between the inside of the ring and the rest of the clouds slowly evened out. The edges softened. The shape became harder to see. I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep it in view, but it kept fading until it was just normal cloud cover again. No trace of the circle. I stood there for a few more seconds, staring at the same spot, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. Then, almost immediately after it disappeared, a distant sound came back. A car, somewhere far off. Then another, a faint rustle of wind through the trees. The normal background noise returned, piece by piece. I felt the pressure in my ears ease. I turned back toward the house. As I stepped inside, the power came back on. Lights flicked up, the fridge hummed to life. The microwave clock reset to blinking zeros. Everything looked normal again. I walked back to the front room window and looked out. The streetlights were on. A house down the road had their porch light glowing. Nothing looked out of place. I stepped outside again, just to be sure. Looked up. The clouds were still there. Same low cover, same night sky, but no ring. Nothing even close to it. I stood there for a while, trying to piece together what I'd just seen. But nothing fit. Not the timing, not the way the clouds had behaved, and not how the entire area seemed to go quiet at the same time. Eventually, I went back inside. Everything in the house worked fine. No signs anything had been wrong. But every time there's a power cut now, even a quick one, I catch myself going to the door. Looking up, half expecting to see that same faint circle in the clouds again, just sitting there. Perfectly still, waiting to fade out like it was never there at all. I noticed the compass first. I'd stopped to check my position because the trail had thinned out more than I expected. It wasn't gone. exactly, just less defined, like fewer people had walked it recently. The ridge I was on ran narrow, with a steep drop on one side and a long slope on the other. Nothing dangerous if you stayed focused, but easy to lose your bearings if you weren't paying attention. My name's Callum. I'd been hiking alone most of the day. It was late afternoon, heading toward dusk. The sky was clear, just starting to dim, and the air had that dry, cool feel you get before the temperature drops fast. I pulled the compass out of my pocket and held it steady. The needle didn't settle. At first, I thought I was just moving too much, so I stopped completely. Planted my feet, held my hands still. The needle drifted slightly past north, paused, then nudged further. Not spinning, not erratic, just off. I tilted the compass, thinking maybe it was catching on something. It wasn't. The needle kept leaning a few degrees away from where it should have been. I checked my phone next, but I already knew it wasn't going to help much. Signal had been gone for hours. Still, I opened the map app. It loaded, but it didn't update my position. The GPS marker just sat there, slightly dimmed, like it was guessing. I looked up from the screen and scanned the ridge. Everything looked the same as it had the last hour. Sparse brush, uneven rock, a few scattered trees lower down the slope. Nothing out of place. I turned slowly, checking the horizon. That's when I noticed the light. It was faint, barely there. Low on the horizon, off to my right. At first, I thought it was just the sun catching something, even though the sun was already dipping behind the hills. But it didn't look like reflection. It looked contained, like a small, distant glow. I squinted, trying to focus on it. The compass needle shifted again in my hand. I glanced down, still off, still drifting slightly further than it should. I held it flat again, trying to get it to correct. It didn't. I looked back at the horizon. The glow was still there. Same spot, same size, not moving. I stood there for a minute or two, just watching it. Nothing changed. No flicker, no spread. Just a dim point of light sitting low against the distant line of hills. I started walking again, slow and careful, keeping the ridgeline steady under my feet. Every few steps I checked the compass. Still wrong. Not wildly, but enough that it didn't make sense. I tried turning in place, seeing if the needle would swing and settle somewhere else. It moved, but it always ended up slightly off, like north had shifted a few degrees and stayed there. I looked up again. The glow was still visible. I stopped walking, stared at it more directly. That's when it pulsed. Just once. A soft, brief increase in brightness. Not sharp, not sudden, more like it swelled slightly, then went back to how it was before. I froze, waited for it to happen again. It didn't. The horizon stayed quiet, the light stayed dim and steady. I felt something then, not fear exactly, just a kind of unease, like something wasn't lining up right. I checked the compass again, same issue, still drifting. I tapped it lightly, like that might fix it. It didn't. I turned my body slightly, lining up with the ridge. Tried to use landmarks instead, but everything looked similar enough that it was hard to be sure. I glanced back at the glow. Still there, still unmoving. I kept walking, slower now, more aware of every step. The ridge narrowed slightly ahead. The drop on the left looked steeper than before. I stayed to the right side, closer to the slope. The air felt still, not calm, just heavy, like the usual breeze had stopped without me noticing. I paused again, listened. Nothing. No wind, no distant sounds, just the faint crunch of my own movements when I shifted. I looked up. The glow pulsed again, same as before, soft, brief, then back to normal. I felt my grip tighten on the compass. The needle twitched, then drifted a little further. I turned my body slowly, watching how it responded. It didn't behave like it should, not snapping to a direction, just easing, like it was following something else. I lowered it, looked back at the horizon. The light hadn't moved. It was exactly where it had been, but something about it felt closer. Not physically, just more present. I started walking again, quicker this time, not running, just trying to get off the ridge. I kept my eyes mostly on the ground ahead, checking my footing. Every now and then I'd glance up. The glow stayed in the same place. The compass didn't fix itself. After a while, could have been 10 minutes, could have been less, the terrain started to widen. The ridge opened out into a broader path. The slope evened out slightly. I felt a small sense of relief. I stopped once more and checked the compass. The needle snapped back, clean, straight to north, no drift, no hesitation, just normal. I blinked, turned slightly. It followed correctly. I turned again, Same thing. I looked up at the horizon. The glow was gone. Not faded, just not there anymore. The sky looked even, darkening, but normal. No trace of where the light had been. I stood there for a bit, going back and forth between the compass and the horizon. Everything behaved the way it should now. Wind picked up again, just a light breeze. I could hear distant movement. Maybe animals, maybe just the environment settling as the temperature dropped. It all felt normal again. I made my way down the rest of the trail without anything else happening. By the time I reached the base, it was nearly dark. I checked the compass one more time before putting it away. Still fine. But even now when I think about it, it wasn't just that the needle was off. It was how it felt while it was happening. Like something nearby had shifted just enough to throw everything slightly out of line. And that light, it didn't move like something far away. It stayed fixed, like it was tied to that exact spot, waiting, until I got far enough away for everything to go back to normal again. I felt it through the seat first. It wasn't strong, just a quick vibration like something heavy rolling somewhere nearby. The kind of thing you barely notice unless you're sitting still. I was parked outside a closed petrol station on the edge of town. Not fully rural, but once you pass that stretch, it's mostly open road and fields. I'd pulled over to check something on my phone before heading home. My name's Lewis. The engine was off, keys still in the ignition, but everything quiet. Radio off, no music, nothing. Just me sitting there in the dark with the dashboard faintly glowing. When the vibration hit, I thought it was another car passing behind me. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. Nothing. No headlights, no movement on the road. I turned slightly, looking over my shoulder. Still nothing. The place was empty. I sat there for a second, waiting to feel it again. It didn't happen. I went back to my phone, scrolling for maybe another 30 seconds before something else caught my attention. The light. It showed up in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just glare, something reflecting off the glass. But when I shifted my eyes, it stayed in place. A faint glow hovering somewhere above the car. Not bright, more like a soft patch of light against the darkness. I slowly lifted my head, trying to see it directly through the windshield. Nothing. The sky ahead was just black. I looked back at the mirror. Still there, that same dim glow sitting just above the roofline. I adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow moved with it. So it wasn't inside the car. It was actually outside, somewhere behind and above me. I leaned forward a bit, trying to change the angle. The light stayed consistent, not flickering, not moving. Just there. I opened the car door slowly and stepped out. The night air felt cool, still. No wind, no distant traffic. I closed the door quietly and looked up. Nothing. The sky above was clear and empty. Stars visible, no clouds, no glow. I stepped back toward the car and looked into the rearview mirror again through the window. There it was. Same spot, same faint light. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. I walked around to the back of the car, craning my neck upward. Still nothing directly above. I even took a few steps away from the car, looking up from a different angle. The sky stayed empty. But the moment I leaned back toward the driver's side and glanced into the mirror again, the glow was there. I got back into the car slowly, closed the door, sat down. The interior felt slightly warmer than before. Not by much, just enough to notice. I kept my eyes on the mirror. The light hadn't changed. It wasn't growing, wasn't dimming, just steady. I reached up and touched the mirror, adjusting it again. The glow shifted with it, always staying just out of direct view. I leaned back in the seat. That's when I felt the vibration again, slightly stronger this time, a low, brief tremor through the seat and the frame of the car. I held still. The glow in the mirror pulsed once, very faint, then went back to normal. I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten slightly. The air inside the car felt heavier, not hard to breathe, just different, like the pressure had changed slightly. I glanced at the dashboard. Everything looked normal, no warning lights. The clock was still running. I checked my phone. No signal, not even a weak one. I hadn't noticed when it dropped. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there, unmoving. I stared at it longer this time, trying to focus on the edges. It didn't have a clear shape, just a soft, circular presence, like light diffused through something. I shifted slightly in my seat. The glow stayed locked in place relative to the mirror. I turned my head, trying to catch even a hint of it through the side windows. Nothing. Just darkness. I felt the vibration again. This time it lasted a second longer, a low, steady hum through the seat. Not loud, not audible, exactly. More something I felt than heard. The glow brightened slightly, still dim but more defined. I held my breath without meaning to. The hum faded. The glow dimmed again. Everything went still. I sat there, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to just start the car and leave. But I didn't move. I kept watching. Seconds passed, maybe longer. Then the glow shifted. Not in direction, in height. It moved upward. Slowly. I could see it rising in the mirror, climbing higher relative to the frame. I leaned forward, trying to follow it. As it rose, the glow got fainter, more diffuse, until it reached the top edge of the mirror and slipped out of view. I immediately looked up through the windshield. Nothing. I opened the door again and stepped out, scanning the sky. Still nothing. No light. No movement. Just stars. I stood there for a while, turning in place, checking every angle I could think of. The night felt normal again. The air was cooler. The slight heaviness was gone. After a minute or two, I got back into the car, sat down, looked at the mirror. Empty. No glow. I started the engine. The sound felt louder than it should have. I sat there for another moment, just listening. Then I pulled out and drove home. The signal came back about a mile down the road. Everything on my phone updated like normal. No missed calls, no messages, nothing unusual. But every now and then, when I'm sitting in my car at night, especially somewhere quiet, I catch myself checking the rearview mirror more than I used to. Not because I expect to see anything, just because whatever that light was, it didn't show up where it should have, only where I wasn't quite looking straight at it, like it stayed just out of reach until it was already gone. I woke up before my alarm because the room was brighter than it should have been. Not fully lit, just enough that I could tell something was off. Normally, just before sunrise, the light spreads slowly across the horizon and the room fills evenly. This wasn't like that. It was coming from one direction, a narrow strip. My name's Daniel. I live on the edge of a small town, backing onto open fields. My bedroom window faces east, so I'm used to seeing the sunrise from bed if I wake up early enough. This didn't look like a sunrise. I stayed still for a second, watching the wall across from me. There was a thin vertical line of light, like someone had cracked open a door and sunlight was spilling through. But there was no door there, just the window. I sat up slowly. The light didn't spread. It stayed tight, contained. I turned toward the window. The curtains were half open like I usually leave them, and through the gap I could see the sky. It didn't look right. Instead of the horizon glowing evenly, there was a vertical band of brightness rising up from it, like a column. It wasn't wide, maybe the width of my hand held out at arm's length. The rest of the sky was still dark. I pushed the covers off and stood up, moving closer to the window. The air felt colder than usual, not freezing, just noticeably cooler than the rest of the house. I rubbed my arms without thinking and leaned toward the glass. The band of light was steady. It wasn't flickering. It wasn't spreading outward, just rising straight up, narrow and defined. I checked the time on my phone, 5:12 a.m. Too early for full daylight, but not so early that the sky should still be that dark either. I unlocked my phone and opened the camera. Tried to zoom in on the horizon. The image didn't capture it properly. The band just looked like a slightly brighter patch, not as clear as what I was seeing with my eyes. I lowered the phone, looked again. Still there, I stepped back and grabbed a hoodie, pulling it on as I moved toward the door. Something about it didn't sit right. It felt too deliberate, like it wasn't just light spreading naturally. I went downstairs and opened the back door. The cold hit a bit harder outside. The air was still, no wind through the grass. No early morning sounds. Usually by that time there's something, birds starting up, distant traffic, but it was quiet. I stepped out onto the patio and looked toward the fields. The horizon was clear, and the light was exactly where I'd seen it from upstairs. A vertical strip rising straight up into the sky. The edges were sharp, not blending into the surrounding darkness, just a clean line separating light from dark. I walked a few steps out onto the grass. The ground felt damp under my shoes. I kept my eyes fixed on it. Didn't change, didn't move sideways, didn't widen, just stayed there. I tried to gauge how far away it was, but it was impossible. It could have been miles out, or something much further. There were no reference points, no clouds intersecting it, nothing to give it scale. I stood there for a minute or two, just watching. My breath started to show slightly in the air. That's when I noticed something else. The light wasn't getting brighter. If anything, it was holding steady while the rest of the sky stayed dark, like time had paused around it. I looked down briefly, checking the ground. The grass around me wasn't lit any differently. No shadows stretching toward me like you'd expect from a rising sun. The light wasn't affecting anything. It was just there. I looked back up, and then it started to change. Not spreading, not dimming. It pulled upward, slow at first. The bottom of the band lifted off the horizon slightly, like someone was dragging it up from below. I frowned, taking a step forward. The movement was smooth, controlled. The strip of light kept retracting, climbing higher into the sky. The lower part faded as it moved, leaving the horizon dark again. I felt my chest tighten a little. I didn't move, just watched. The band got shorter and shorter until it was just a vertical line suspended above the horizon. Then it kept rising. The edges softened slightly as it got higher. The brightness dimmed just a bit. I squinted, trying to keep track of it. It thinned out as it went, like it was stretching. Then, in a way I can't really describe properly, it just disappeared. Not fading out gradually, not blinking, just gone. The sky was left exactly as it should have been, dark, with the faint hint of early morning light starting to build evenly across the horizon. I stood there for a while after that, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The normal sunrise started maybe 10 minutes later. Slow. Even. Exactly how it always is. I went back inside eventually. Closed the door behind me. The house felt warmer again. Normal. I checked my phone. The time had only moved forward a few minutes. No missed notifications. Nothing unusual. I went back upstairs and looked out the window again. The sky was already starting to brighten properly now. No sign of that vertical band. No trace of where it had been. Everything looked exactly the way it should. But now, whenever I wake up early and see the first light coming through the curtains, I catch myself staring at it a little longer than I used to, just watching how it spreads, making sure it doesn't stay narrow, making sure it doesn't start pulling upward, like something taking it back before the day even begins. I noticed it because the shadow went the wrong way. I was driving home late, taking a back road I'd used plenty of times before. It runs through a stretch of farmland, nothing but hedges, fields, and the occasional gate. No streetlights out there, just your headlights and whatever they catch. My name's Ryan. It was just after 1 a.m. and the weather was clear but cold. No fog, no rain, nothing that would mess with visibility. I was doing about 40, just cruising, not really thinking about anything. Then it happened. For a split second, my headlights threw a shadow upward. Not ahead on the road. Up, like something between me and the sky had blocked the light. It was quick. Too quick to really process. I blinked, instinctively glancing up through the windshield. There was nothing there, just open sky. I slowed down slightly, my hands tightening on the wheel. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a bird, but it didn't feel like that. Birds don't cast shadows like that at that angle, and they don't vanish instantly without any movement. I kept driving. The road stretched ahead, empty. The hedges on either side stayed consistent, nothing breaking the line. I kept glancing upward, trying to catch anything unusual. Nothing. A minute passed. Then it happened again, this time clearer. The headlights hit something above the road, and for a fraction of a second I saw a shape, not fully. Just the absence of light, a smooth curve cutting into the beam. The shadow went up again across the windshield, faint but noticeable. Then it was gone. I hit the brakes harder this time, slowing to almost a stop. My heart started picking up. I leaned forward slightly, looking up through the glass. Nothing. No wires, no signs, no trees crossing overhead. The sky was completely clear. I rolled the window down a crack. The air outside was still. No wind, no distant engines. Just that quiet you get when you're far from everything. I pulled the car to the side of the road and stopped. Left the engine running. The headlights illuminated the stretch ahead. I stared at the sky, trying to find anything, even a hint of movement. Nothing. I reached up and turned off the headlights. Darkness swallowed everything immediately. The stars were visible again. clear, steady. I waited a few seconds, then I turned the headlights back on. The beam shot forward, nothing above it. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Told myself it had to be something small, a bird, maybe debris, something that just happened to catch the light wrong. I put the car back in gear and started moving again. Slower now, more cautious. My eyes kept drifting upward, half expecting it to happen again, and it did, a third time. This one lasted just a fraction longer, long enough that I saw more of the shape. It wasn't sharp, no clear edges, just a smooth, curved underside, like the bottom of something large. It cut through the beam of my headlights and bent the lights slightly before disappearing. The shadow climbed the windshield again, upward, then gone. I felt a cold rush through me. I slowed down to a crawl, barely moving now. My eyes locked on the sky. I couldn't see anything directly, but I could feel something. Not physically, just a sense that something was there, above the road, moving with me. I stopped the car again. This time I left the headlights on. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The ground crunched under my shoes. I looked straight up. Nothing. The sky looked normal. Stars scattered evenly. No shapes, no movement. I turned slowly, scanning every direction. Still nothing. I stepped back toward the car and looked at the beam of the headlights. They cut through the air cleanly. No interruptions, no shadows. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Then I got back in, closed the door, sat there, staring at the road ahead. I didn't want to keep driving, but I didn't want to stay there either. I put the car back into gear and started moving again, very slowly. My eyes flicked between the road and the sky. Nothing happened for a while, long enough that I started to think it was over. Then, just as I was about to relax, it happened one last time. The shadow snapped upward, but this time, it felt closer, more immediate. The shape cut through the light again, and for a split second, I saw it tilt. Not clearly, just a slight shift in the curve. Then it moved upward, fast, gone instantly. The sky above went empty, completely clear. I slammed the brakes and stopped again. My chest was tight. I leaned forward, trying to see anything. Nothing. I stayed there for a long time, watching, waiting, but it didn't come back. Eventually, I drove the rest of the way home, didn't see anything else. The road stayed empty, the sky stayed normal, but the whole way back, I couldn't stop thinking about the angle of that shadow. It didn't behave like something far away. It felt like whatever was there was close enough that my headlights could actually reach it. Close enough to sit just above the road, moving along with me, just out of sight, until it wasn't there anymore. I noticed it with my eyes closed. I'd already settled in for the night, lights off, phone on the nightstand, just lying there trying to fall asleep. It was quiet in the house. No TV, no music, just the usual low creaks you get when everything cools down. My name's Joel. I live alone, small place, nothing unusual about it. That night felt completely normal up until that point. I had my eyes closed, just waiting for sleep to come, when I saw the flicker. It wasn't bright, just a faint flash, like distant lightning behind your eyelids. Soft, quick, gone almost immediately. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, no light coming through the curtains, no cars passing outside, nothing. I stayed still for a second, listening. No thunder, no rain, nothing that would explain it. I closed my eyes again, just to see if it would happen a second time. I waited. 10 seconds, maybe 20. Nothing. I opened them again. Still just darkness. I shifted slightly in bed, adjusting the pillow, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe just something with my eyes, like when you see random flashes sometimes. I closed my eyes again. Another few seconds passed. Then something else caught my attention. A faint sound. Not loud, just subtle, like something tapping lightly somewhere in the house. I kept my eyes closed, trying to pinpoint it. It stopped. I opened my eyes again. The room looked the same. I turned my head slightly, looking toward the door. Closed, no light under it. I listened. Nothing. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling. There was just enough ambient light from outside to make out the outline of things, the wardrobe, the chair in the corner. Everything looked normal. I reached over and checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. No notifications. No missed calls. I put it back down and lay there, trying to settle again. After a minute or so, I closed my eyes. No flicker this time. Just darkness. I exhaled slowly, starting to drift. Then I felt something. Not a touch, just a slight shift in the air, like the room had changed pressure slightly. It was subtle, but enough to make me open my eyes again. I sat up a bit this time, propping myself on my elbows. The room looked the same, but something felt off. Hard to explain. Just a sense that something wasn't quite right. I listened again. No tapping, no movement, nothing. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a moment. The floor felt colder than usual under my feet. I stood up and walked over to the window, pulled the curtain back slightly. The street outside was empty. No cars, no lights moving. The sky was clear, no clouds, definitely no storm. I let the curtain fall back into place, turned around and looked at the room again. Everything where it should be. Nothing disturbed. I stood there for another minute, then got back into bed. Pulled the covers up, tried to relax. I kept my eyes open this time, staring at the ceiling. After a while, I closed them again. Still nothing. No flicker, no sound. Just darkness. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. But something else bothered me in the morning. When I woke up, my phone wasn't where I'd left it. It was still on the nightstand, but closer to the edge, like it had been nudged, not fallen. Just moved. I picked it up and checked it. Battery was lower than it should have been. I'd gone to bed with around 60%. It was down to 18%. No apps running, no calls, no messages. I checked the usage. There was a gap from around 2:15 to just after 3. No recorded activity, just a drop in battery. I stood there for a second staring at the screen. Then I put it back down. The rest of the day went on normally, nothing else strange. But that night, when I went to bed, I caught myself hesitating before turning the light off, just thinking about that flicker. How it looked exactly like distant lightning, except there was no storm, and how it only happened once. Like something far away or something I couldn't see, briefly showed up just enough to register before disappearing again, without leaving anything behind to prove it was ever there at all. It started sometime after the fire burned down. I was sitting on a folding chair just outside my tent watching the last bits of wood collapse into embers. It had been a normal evening up to that point. I'd hiked in earlier that afternoon, set up camp near a small clearing, maybe half a mile off the main trail. Nothing remote enough to feel dangerous, but far enough that I hadn't seen anyone else since I got there. My name's Aaron. I camp alone pretty often. I'm used to the usual sounds. Wind through trees, insects, the occasional animal moving around at a distance. That night was calm. No wind. The trees weren't moving much at all. Just the quiet crackle of the fire and the usual background noise from the woods. Then I noticed the humming. At first, I thought it was something far off, maybe a plane or machinery from somewhere I couldn't see. It was low, barely noticeable, just a steady tone sitting under everything else. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. It blended in enough that it didn't feel out of place. But after a minute or two, I realized it was changing, slowly. The pitch would rise just a little, hold there, then drop again. Not in a pattern I could predict, just shifting. I leaned forward slightly, listening. The fire popped softly behind me, but the humming stayed consistent under it. I turned my head to the left. It seemed like it was coming from that direction. Then I turned to the right. Now it felt like it was coming from there instead. I frowned and stood up, stepping a few feet away from the fire. The sound didn't get louder or quieter. It didn't move the way a normal sound would. It just stayed, like it wasn't tied to any one place. I walked a few steps toward the edge of the clearing. The ground crunched lightly under my boots. The humming shifted again, not directionally, just in pitch. Slightly higher now. I stopped and listened. The rest of the forest felt quieter than it should have been. The insects were still there, but faint, like they were further away than they actually were. I turned slowly in a full circle, trying to pinpoint it. Every direction felt the same. No matter where I faced, the sound didn't localize. It just existed. I went back to the fire and crouched down, poking at the embers with a stick. The glow brightened slightly. For a moment, the humming seemed to dip lower. Then it rose again. I froze, holding the stick in place. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it felt connected somehow. Not directly, just reactive. I straightened up and stepped back. The pitch shifted again. I looked up through the trees. The sky was mostly clear, a few branches cutting across it. I could see a handful of stars through the gaps. Nothing unusual. I stayed there, standing still, listening. The sound continued to drift, higher, lower, as if never repeating the same change twice. After a while, I realized something else. The pauses. Every so often, the humming would stop completely, just for a second, then come back at a slightly different pitch. Each time it cut out, the silence felt deeper than it should have, like everything else dropped out with it for that brief moment. I stepped further into the clearing, away from the fire. The darkness felt thicker out there. The humming continued. I tried walking toward where I thought it might be. 5 steps forward. 10. It didn't get closer. Didn't get louder. Just stayed the same. I stopped again. The sound dipped low, then slowly climbed higher than before. My ears felt strange, not painful, just aware of the pressure. I swallowed, but it didn't change. I turned back toward the tent. For a second, I thought I saw something move between the trees. Not a shape, just a slight shift, like the darkness had changed position. Like I stared at that spot. Nothing moved. The humming dropped again, lower now, almost below what I could clearly hear. I walked back toward the fire. Each step felt louder than it should have. The sound stayed with me, unchanging in volume, unfixed in place. I sat down on the chair again, tried to act like everything was normal, but I couldn't stop listening for it. It kept shifting, up, down, up again. At one point, it rose high enough that it felt almost sharp, not loud, just present. Then it dipped again. I checked my watch. It had been about 20 minutes since I first noticed it. Didn't feel like that long. I sat there, watching the embers fade. The humming continued. At some point, I realized the forest had gone completely quiet. No insects, no rustling, nothing. Just the hum. I stood up again, slowly. Looked around the clearing. Everything was still. I took a few steps toward the tent. The humming cut out, completely. The silence hit hard, like a pressure. I stopped moving, held my breath without meaning to. Then, just as suddenly, the sound came back, lower than before. Almost distant, the other sounds returned with it. Insects, a faint movement in the trees. The forest felt normal again. I stood there for a few seconds longer. Then I got into the tent and zipped it up. The humming stayed outside. I could still hear it faintly through the fabric. It kept shifting, slow, unpredictable. I lay there, staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening to it drift up and down, trying to tell myself it was something normal, something explainable, but it never settled into anything familiar, and it never stayed in one place long enough to feel like it was coming from anywhere at all. I noticed it in the windows before I noticed anything in the sky. I was walking home late, cutting through a residential street I don't usually take. My name's Marcus. It's a quieter road, mostly older houses spaced out a bit more than the rest of the neighborhood. No shops, no traffic that time of night. It was around 11:30, maybe a little later. The weather was dry, not cold, just still. No wind, no movement in the trees, the kind of night where everything feels a bit too quiet. I just turned onto the street when I saw it. A faint glow reflecting in the windows of the houses ahead. Not bright, just enough to catch your eye. It stretched across a few houses in a row like something behind me, or above me, was lighting them up at an angle. At first, I assumed it was a car, maybe headlights turning onto the road behind me, but I didn't hear an engine. And the light didn't move the way headlights usually do. It stayed steady. I kept walking, slowing down slightly. The glow remained in the same place relative to the houses ahead. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. The street behind me was empty. No cars, no lights. I stopped for a second, turning fully to look back. Still nothing. When I turned forward again, the glow was still there, reflecting off the windows. Same intensity, same position. I frowned and kept walking. As I got closer, the reflections became clearer. They weren't flickering, not shifting, just a soft, dim illumination across the glass. But there was no visible source, no streetlight positioned that way, no house lights casting it. I checked the roofs, the sky above the houses. Nothing stood out. No bright object, no moving light, just darkness. I felt a slight tension in my chest. Not fear exactly, just confusion. I picked up my pace a little. The closer I got, the more obvious it became that the light wasn't coming from the usual places. It wasn't coming from the ground. It wasn't coming from the sides. It felt like it was coming from above, but not directly overhead, at an angle that didn't make sense. I stopped again, about halfway down the street. The reflections were still ahead of me. not reaching where I was standing yet. I looked up again. The sky looked normal, no clouds, stars visible, no glow. I stepped forward again, one step at a time. As I moved, the reflections seemed to stay just ahead of me, like I was walking toward them but never quite reaching them. I slowed down even more. The street felt unusually quiet. No distant cars, no dogs barking, nothing. Just my footsteps on the pavement. I took another step. The glow didn't move closer. It stayed just beyond where I was. I stopped again, waited. The reflections stayed in place. I felt something then, a slight pressure in my ears. Not strong, just noticeable, like the air had shifted slightly. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I looked up again. Still nothing, but something felt off. I took a few more steps forward. This time, I reached the first house where the reflection had been. I looked directly at the window. There was nothing in it. No glow, no reflection, just darkness inside. I turned slightly, looking at the next house. Same thing. The glow had moved further down. Still ahead of me. I felt my heart rate pick up. I walked faster now, trying to catch up to it. But no matter how quickly I moved, it stayed just out of reach. Always one or two houses ahead. I stopped again. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I stood still, breathing slowly. The glow didn't fade, didn't shift, just held its position. I turned in a slow circle, looking for any source. Nothing behind me, nothing above me, nothing to the sides. But the reflections were still there, ahead. I took a step forward, and suddenly, I was in it. The glow surrounded the windows on either side of me. For a brief moment, the glass lit up softly. Not bright, just enough to see. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I blinked, standing still. The street looked normal again. Dark, quiet, no reflections, no glow. I looked up again, scanning the sky. Nothing. I listened. The usual sounds started to return. A car somewhere in the distance. A faint rustle of leaves. The pressure in my ears eased. I stood there for another minute, trying to process what had just happened. Then, I kept walking. The rest of the way home felt normal. No more lights, no more reflections. Everything looked the way it should. But I kept thinking about how the glow never had a source. How it stayed just ahead of me, like it was moving with me. And how, when I finally stepped into it, there was nothing there at all. Just empty air, and then nothing. Like whatever it was had already passed, without ever showing what caused it. I woke up because the room felt wrong. Not loud, not bright, just off. The kind of feeling you get when you open your eyes and something doesn't line up, even if you can't say what it is yet. I lay there for a second, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I realized it. My alarm hadn't gone off. I turned my head toward the nightstand. My phone was there, screen dark. I reached over and picked it up. The time read 7:42 a.m. I blinked, sitting up slightly. My alarm was set for 6:15. I never sleep through it. I'm a light sleeper, always have been. Even the first vibration usually wakes me up. I unlocked the phone. The alarm screen popped up like normal, except it showed dismissed 3:09 a.m. I stared at it, trying to make sense of that. 3:09. That didn't mean anything to me. I didn't remember waking up at that time. I didn't remember turning the alarm off. I checked the log again, thinking maybe I was reading it wrong. Same thing. Dismissed at 3:09 a.m. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the grogginess. Maybe I'd woken up, turned it off, and gone back to sleep. That happens sometimes, I guess. But not like that. Not 3 hours early. And I would have remembered it. At least something about it. I sat there for a minute, just holding the phone. The room felt colder than usual. Not freezing, just slightly cooler than it should have been for that time of morning. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor felt cold under my feet. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back. The sky was already fully lit. Normal morning, no signs of anything unusual. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned around. That's when I noticed the bedroom door. It was open, just slightly, maybe a few inches. I always close it before I go to sleep. Not all the way, but enough that it sits in the frame. Now it was cracked open wider than that. I stood there for a second, looking at it, trying to remember if I'd gotten up during the night. Nothing came back. No memory of leaving the bed. No memory of opening the door. I walked over slowly and pushed it open. The hallway looked normal. No lights on. No movement. I stepped out and checked the rest of the house. Everything was the same as I'd left it. Nothing out of place. I went back into the bedroom and sat down on the edge of the bed. Picked up my phone again, scrolled through it, no messages, no notifications from that time. Battery had dropped more than usual overnight. I'd gone to bed with about 70%. Now it was at 22%. I checked the usage. There was a gap from around 2:50 a.m. to just after 3:20. No recorded activity, just a drop in battery. I stared at that for a while, trying to think of anything that could explain it. Maybe an app running in the background, maybe something glitching, but it didn't sit right. I set the phone down and looked around the room again. That's when I noticed something else. The curtain. It was pulled back slightly more than I remembered, just enough that a thin line of light was coming through the edge. I got up and adjusted it. It slid easily. Nothing stuck. Nothing unusual. But I knew I hadn't left it like that. I stood there for a moment, staring at the window. Then I turned away, went into the bathroom, turned on the light. The brightness felt harsher than usual. I splashed water on my face, trying to wake myself up properly. When I looked up at the mirror, I paused. Not because of anything I saw, just because something felt delayed, like my reflection took a fraction of a second longer to match my movement. It was subtle. So subtle, I couldn't be sure. I moved my head slightly. Everything lined up, normal. I leaned closer. Still normal. I stepped back. The feeling passed. I stood there for a second longer, then turned off the light and went back into the bedroom. The house felt quiet, too quiet. I picked up my phone again and checked the time. 7:51 now. Everything moving forward like it should. I sat down on the bed again, trying to piece together what had happened. But there was nothing to piece together. No memory. No clear sign of anything. Just small things. The alarm turned off hours early. The door slightly open, the curtain shifted, the battery drained. None of it added up on its own. But together, it didn't feel like nothing. I got dressed and went about my day like normal. Work, errands, everything. But I kept checking my phone more than usual, looking at the alarm log, the gap in usage. It didn't change. Still said the same thing, dismissed at 3:09 a.m. That night, when I went to bed, I double-checked everything. Set the alarm, closed the door, pulled the curtain exactly where I wanted it, plugged the phone in. I lay down and stared at the ceiling for a while before closing my eyes. I remember thinking about that time, 3:09. Trying to picture myself waking up, reaching over, turning the alarm off, but nothing came to mind. No image, no feeling, just a blank space where something should have been. Eventually I fell asleep, and for a moment, just before I drifted off, I had this strange thought that whatever happened at 3:09, it wasn't something I forgot. It was something that didn't leave anything behind, except the small changes that I only noticed afterward when everything had already gone back to normal. I noticed it when my line stopped drifting. I'd been standing there for a while, maybe 40 minutes, just casting out and letting the current do most of the work. It was early evening, that in-between time where it's not quite dark, but the light's already fading. The river ran slow where I was, but not still. You could always see it moving if you looked close enough. My name's Callum. I'd driven out to this spot a few times before. It's a stretch just past a bend, shallow near the edge, deeper toward the middle. Nobody else around that night. I'd passed one car on the way in, that was it. The air was warm, no wind, just a few insects buzzing near the reeds. Normal. I cast again, watched the line settle, and leaned the rod slightly against my forearm. That's when I noticed the water directly in front of me. It had gone flat. Not calm the way rivers sometimes look at a distance. I mean completely still, like a patch of glass. It wasn't huge, maybe 6 or 7 feet across, centered roughly where my line was sitting. Outside of it, the river kept moving like it always did. Small ripples, subtle current. But inside that circle, nothing. I frowned and leaned forward a bit. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light. The sun had dropped low enough that reflections could get weird, but when I shifted my angle, it stayed the same, perfectly smooth. I gave the rod a small tug just to see how the line reacted. The float moved slightly, but the water around it didn't ripple. It slid across that still surface like it wasn't touching anything. I straightened up slowly, looking around. The rest of the river looked normal. Same gentle movement, same sound. But where I was standing, The sound felt dampened, not gone, just quieter, like something was absorbing it. I took a step to the side. The circle didn't move. It stayed fixed in place, centered in the same spot on the water. I took another step. Same thing. It wasn't following me. It wasn't attached to me. It was just there. I crouched down a bit, trying to get closer to it without stepping into the water. The surface was so smooth it didn't even reflect properly. The sky above looked slightly off in that patch. Not distorted exactly, just less defined. I picked up a small pebble from the bank, held it over the circle for a second, then dropped it in. I expected a splash, or at least a ripple. Instead, the pebble disappeared through the surface with barely any reaction. No splash, no sound, just a faint disturbance, like something soft being pressed. Then the surface went back to being perfectly still. I stared at it, my stomach tightening. I dropped another one, same result. Outside the circle, the water reacted normally when the pebble hit. Inside, nothing. I stood up slowly. The air felt heavier, like it had thickened slightly. I became aware of how quiet everything had gotten. The insects were gone. Or maybe they were still there, just quieter. I couldn't tell. I looked up and down the river. Still empty. No movement anywhere else. Just that one circle. I stepped back from the edge a bit. The feeling in my chest wasn't fear yet, but it was getting there. More like a steady pressure. I glanced at my line again. It was still sitting inside the circle, completely still. I reeled it in slowly. As the float crossed the edge of the circle, the water reacted again. Small ripples formed immediately. Normal. I stopped reeling and let the line hang just above the surface. The circle remained unchanged. I noticed something else then. The edge of it. It wasn't sharp exactly, but it was defined. You could tell where the moving water stopped and the stillness began. And it wasn't perfectly round, slightly uneven, like it had shape but not a clean one. I took another step back. My foot crunched on gravel. The sound felt too loud. I kept my eyes on the water. The circle didn't move, didn't react, just stayed there. I felt a sudden urge to leave, not panic, just a strong sense that I shouldn't be standing there anymore. I backed up a few more steps, then turned slightly, still watching it. The trees behind me rustled faintly. The sounds seemed to come back all at once. Insects, water, everything, like something had been holding it back. I looked back at the river. The circle was still there, but it looked thinner, less solid. The surface wasn't as perfectly smooth anymore. I stood there, watching. Over the next few seconds, the edges started to blur. The stillness broke apart. Small ripples crept in from the outside until the whole surface was moving again. Completely normal, like nothing had ever been there. I waited a minute, then another. Nothing changed. Just the river flowing the way it always does. I didn't cast again. Just packed up my things and left. As I walked back to the car, I kept thinking about the way the pebble had disappeared. No splash, no sound, and how for that brief stretch of time, the water around me hadn't been behaving like water at all. Just something that looked like it, until it decided to go back to normal. I first noticed it when I stepped off the main road. It was late, just after 10, and I was walking back from a friend's place. My name's Lewis. I usually stick to the lit streets, but that night I cut through a quieter residential area to save time. It's one of those neighborhoods with long stretches between streetlights, trees hanging over the pavement, and hardly any traffic at that hour. Everything felt normal at first. Just my footsteps, a distant car somewhere, the occasional rustle of leaves. Then I heard it, a faint buzzing. So quiet I almost thought I imagined it. I stopped walking. It stopped too, completely. I stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. I started walking again. A few steps in, the buzzing came back, low, soft. Not loud enough to be annoying, just noticeable. I slowed down, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It felt like it was above me. Not directly overhead, but somewhere in that general space. I looked up. The sky was mostly clear, a few clouds drifting, nothing unusual. No planes, no drones, no visible source. I kept walking. The buzzing stayed with me, fading in and out slightly, like it was just on the edge of being audible. Then I stepped under a streetlight. The sound cut out instantly, not faded, not lowered, just gone. I slowed to a stop beneath the light, looking up again. Still nothing. The usual quiet returned. I took a step forward, moving out from under the light. The buzzing came back. Same as before. Faint. Overhead. I stopped again. It stopped. I felt a small tightening in my chest. I stepped back into the light. Silence. I stepped out again. Buzzing. I stood there for a moment, testing it. In the light, nothing. Out of it, the sound returned. I looked up again, more carefully this time, trying to spot anything that could explain it, but there was nothing there. No movement. No change in the sky. I continued walking, slower now. The gaps between streetlights were long enough that I spent more time in the dark than under them. Every time I stepped into darkness, the buzzing came back. Every time I reached a pool of light, it vanished, like it didn't exist there. I tried to ignore it at first, told myself it was something electrical, maybe power lines, but there weren't any directly above me, and it didn't behave like that. It wasn't consistent. It wasn't fixed. It followed me. I tested that without thinking. I crossed the street halfway down the block. The buzzing stayed above me. Same distance, same volume. I walked faster. It kept pace. I slowed down. It slowed too. I stopped. It stopped. That's when it really started to feel wrong. I kept my eyes forward, but I was listening hard now. Every step I took, I paid attention when the sound would fade in and when it would disappear. Streetlight. Silence. Darkness. Buzzing. Again and again. I noticed something else after a few minutes. The buzzing wasn't completely steady. It had a slight variation to it. Not a pattern. Just small changes, like it was shifting slightly, but not enough to form anything recognizable. I reached a longer stretch of road where two streetlights had gone out. The space between them was darker than the rest. As I walked into that stretch, the buzzing grew slightly louder. Not by much, just enough that I didn't have to strain to hear it anymore. I slowed down, the sound stayed steady. I looked up again. Nothing, but something felt off. The air felt heavier, the quiet, deeper. I kept walking, the buzzing stayed with me. Then, about halfway through that dark stretch, it changed. The pitch dipped slightly, then rose again. Not sudden, just gradual. I stopped. The sound stopped completely. I stood there, holding still. The silence pressed in, then I took one step forward. The buzzing came back immediately. Same position, same faint intensity. I felt a strong urge to get back under a streetlight. Not panic, just a need to be out of that darkness. I walked faster now, almost a brisk pace. The buzzing followed, always just above, always fading out completely whenever I reached the next light. I reached the end of the street and turned onto a busier road. More lights, more ambient noise, cars passing in the distance. The buzzing didn't come back. I walked a bit further just to be sure. Nothing, no sound, no sense of anything above me. Everything felt normal again. I slowed down, took a breath, tried to convince myself it had been something simple, something explainable, but I couldn't shake the way it behaved, how it followed me, how it vanished completely under the lights. Like whatever it was, it couldn't exist there, or didn't want to be seen there, and only stayed with me, as long as I was in the dark. I noticed it before I realized what I was looking at. I was driving home late, cutting through a back road I don't usually take. My name's Ethan. It runs between two small towns, mostly farmland on either side, no streetlights, just a narrow stretch of tarmac that dips and curves a bit. That night, the fog had rolled in thick. Not heavy enough to stop driving, but enough that the headlights only pushed out a short distance before everything faded into gray. It made everything feel closer than it was, like the world ended just beyond the beam. I kept my speed down, maybe 30, just taking it easy. The road was empty. No headlights coming the other way, no cars behind me, just the sound of the engine and the tires on the road. Then I saw it. At first, it didn't register as anything strange, just a darker patch in the fog ahead, the kind you see sometimes where the mist gets uneven. But as I got closer, something about it didn't sit right. The fog wasn't just darker there, it was shaped like it was bending. I slowed down a little more, the headlights hit it directly now, and I could see it clearly. The fog curved around something, not sharply, just a subtle distortion, like there was an object there, invisible, pushing the fog aside. The shape wasn't defined, more like an absence, an outline suggested by how the fog moved. I leaned forward slightly, gripping the wheel tighter. The car rolled closer. The shape stayed in the same spot on the road, not moving, not drifting, just there. I tapped the brakes gently. The car slowed to maybe 20. The fog swirled around the shape but never crossed into it. like it couldn't. I felt a tightening in my chest. My eyes kept trying to focus on it, but there was nothing to lock onto. Just that warped space. I checked the mirrors out of habit. Still no one else on the road. I looked back at it. Now I was close enough that it filled most of the space in front of the car. The shape felt taller than the car. Not wide enough to block the whole road, but enough that I couldn't just ignore it. I slowed even more. Almost crawling now. The headlights didn't reflect off anything. No surface, no edges, just fog bending around empty space. I rolled down the window slightly. The cold air rushed in. The sound outside was muted, dampened by the fog. I listened. Nothing. No wind. No movement. I eased forward another few feet. The front of the car was almost at the edge of it. The fog closest to the headlights curled and shifted, but still avoided that space. Like there was something solid there. I hesitated. Then I did something I can't really explain. I inched the car forward just enough to see what would happen. The headlights passed through where the edge of the shape should have been, and for a second, the light bent, not reflected, not blocked, just distorted, like it curved slightly before continuing. I froze, my foot hovering over the brake, the car barely moving. The distortion lasted just a moment. Then the fog shifted. A thicker wave of it rolled through, and the shape was gone. Completely. The fog filled the space like it had never been interrupted. I blinked, trying to process it. I looked left and right. Nothing. Just the same gray haze. I sat there for a few seconds, engine idling. My heart was beating faster now. I checked the road ahead. Clear. As far as I could see. I pulled the window back up and drove forward slowly, through where it had been. Nothing happened. No resistance. No sound. Just normal road under the tires. I kept driving. Didn't speed up right away. Just moved through the fog, watching carefully. Every patch of darker mist caught my attention now. Every slight variation made me tense, but nothing else looked like that. Nothing else bent the way that did. After a few minutes, the fog started to thin. The edges of the road became clearer. The fields opened up again. By the time I reached the main road, everything felt normal. Lights from a distant house, a car passing on the opposite side, sound returned fully. But I couldn't shake that moment. The way the fog had curved, the way the light had bent, and how there had clearly been something there, taking up space without ever showing what it was. I noticed the cold before I fully woke up. Not freezing, just wrong. Like the temperature in the room had dropped a few degrees below the rest of the house. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, still half asleep, but something about the air felt unsettled. Not just cold, but like it had been moving recently. My name's Ryan. I live in a small semi-detached place, nothing unusual about it. Heating's consistent, no drafts that I've ever noticed. But that morning, the air felt different. I opened my eyes slowly. The room was dim. Early morning light coming through the curtains, not enough to fully light the space. I stayed still for a few seconds, listening. Nothing out of the ordinary. No footsteps, no sounds from outside, just quiet. I shifted slightly under the covers, and that's when I felt it more clearly. A faint current of air across my face. Not a breeze. More like the leftover movement after something passes by. I frowned and pushed myself up onto my elbow. The room looked normal. Door closed, window shut, curtains still. I sat up fully and swung my legs out of bed. The floor felt colder than usual. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out where the air movement could be coming from. I walked over to the window first. Checked the latch, still locked. No gaps, no signs of it being opened. I pulled the curtain aside slightly. The glass was cool, but not unusually so. No condensation, like no sign of a draft. I let the curtain fall back and turned toward the door. It was exactly how I'd left it, closed but not latched all the way. I opened it and stepped into the hallway. The temperature changed immediately. Warmer, normal. I stood there, one foot in the hallway, one still in the bedroom. There was a clear difference. I stepped back into the room, cold again. Not dramatically, but enough to notice. I rubbed my arms, trying to shake the feeling. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the air itself. It felt disturbed, like something had passed through recently and hadn't fully settled. I walked slowly around the room, paying attention to how it felt in different spots. Near the bed, it was the coldest. Closer to the door, it felt more normal. I stopped near the foot of the bed and stood there for a moment, The feeling was strongest there, that faint sense of movement, like a space that had just been occupied. I glanced down at the carpet. Nothing out of place. No marks, no indentations. I checked the rest of the room. Wardrobe closed. Chair in the corner untouched. Nothing had been moved. I walked back over to the bed and sat down. The mattress felt colder than usual. I placed my hand on the sheets beside where I'd been lying. They were cool, not body warm like they should have been. I frowned and pulled my phone from the nightstand. Checked the time. 6:38 a.m. I looked at the battery, lower than I expected. I'd gone to bed with around 80%. Now it was at 35%. I opened the usage screen. There was a gap from around 3 a.m. to just after 4. No activity listed, just a drop in battery. I stared at it for a second, then locked the phone and set it back down. The room still felt off. I stood up again and walked slowly toward the door. As I passed the middle of the room, I felt it again, that faint shift in the air. Like something had just moved past me. I stopped, turned slightly, nothing there. I held still, listening. The house was quiet, no sounds from outside, no movement, but the air around me felt recently disturbed. I stepped into the hallway again. The difference was immediate, warm, still, normal. I turned and looked back into the bedroom. It didn't look any different. Same light, same shadows, but it felt separate, like a pocket of colder air had been left behind. I went into the kitchen and made coffee, trying to shake it off. The rest of the house felt fine. No temperature issues, no drafts, everything as it should be. After a few minutes, I went back to the bedroom. The cold had mostly faded. The air felt normal again. Still, settled. Like whatever had been there had moved on. I stood in the doorway for a second, looking at the bed, trying to picture what could have caused it. A draft, a window opening. Something simple, but none of it fit. Especially not the way the air had felt. Not just cold, but recently moved. Like I'd woken up just after something had passed through the room and left before I could see it, leaving only that brief, unsettled feeling behind, before everything went back to normal. I noticed it when I shifted my gaze. I'd been lying back on the hood of my car out on a gravel turnout just off a rural road. My friend Daniel had told me about the spot, said it was good for stargazing because there's barely any light pollution out there. He wasn't wrong. It was late, sometime after midnight. The sky was clear, no clouds, just a wide spread of stars, the kind where you start seeing more the longer you stare. I'd driven out alone, didn't feel like company that night, just wanted quiet. I was stretched out with my hands behind my head, looking up, letting my eyes adjust. That's when I noticed it. I moved my eyes from one cluster of stars to another, just scanning slowly. And for a second, one of them didn't move with the rest. Everything else shifted like normal when your eyes move, sliding slightly across your vision. But this one stayed where it was, just for a fraction of a second longer. Then it snapped into place with everything else. I blinked, frowning slightly. I shifted my gaze again, trying to repeat it. Same thing. That same star seemed to stick for a moment, like it was lagging behind the rest. I sat up a little, leaning forward, focusing on it. It looked like any other star, same brightness, same color. Nothing about it stood out until I moved my eyes. I tested it again, looked to the left, then quickly back. Everything moved except that one. It stayed in the same spot in my vision just a beat longer than it should have. Then it corrected itself. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was something with my vision. After images or something like that. I looked away for a few seconds, then back up. Tried again, same result. It didn't happen with any other star, just that one. I stood up from the hood and walked a few steps away from the car, changed my angle, looked up again, still there, still doing the same thing. I felt a small knot form in my stomach, not panic, just unease. I checked my phone for the time, 1:18 a.m. No signal out there. I put it back in my pocket and looked up again. The star was still in the same place relative to everything else, not moving on its own, just behaving wrong when I moved. I tried keeping my head still and just shifting my eyes. That's when it became more obvious. Every time my eyes moved, the rest of the sky followed immediately, but that one point lagged, like it was being rendered a second later. I exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. I told myself it had to be something with my eyes, some kind of visual glitch, but it didn't feel like that. It felt external, like something was slightly out of sync. I climbed back onto the hood of the car and lay down again, trying to watch it without moving my eyes too much, just staring directly at it. When I did that, nothing seemed wrong. It looked completely normal. It was only when I shifted my gaze that it behaved differently. I lay there for a while, testing it, looking away, then back. Every time it lagged, consistently. I started to notice something else after a few minutes. The surrounding stars felt quieter. I know that sounds strange, but it's the best way I can put it. Usually when you stare at the sky like that, there's a kind of depth to it, a sense of distance. But around that star, it felt flatter, subtle but noticeable. I sat up again, scanning the rest of the sky. Everything else looked normal, just that one point felt off. I checked my phone again, 1:27. 9 minutes had passed. It didn't feel like that long. I stood there, shifting my weight, looking up. The air felt still, too still. No wind, no sound except for a faint hum from somewhere far off, probably power lines or something. Then that hum faded, just gone. I noticed it immediately because of how quiet it got. No insects, no distant traffic, nothing. I turned slowly, looking around. The road was empty. Fields on either side, stretching out into darkness. I looked back up at the sky. The star was still there, still doing the same thing. I took a step back toward the car. As I did, I shifted my gaze again. This time, the lag felt longer. Not just a fraction of a second, closer to a full second. I froze, stared at it, then moved my eyes again. Same thing. Everything moved. That one point stayed fixed, then snapped back. My chest felt tight now. I didn't like it. Didn't like how consistent it was. Didn't like how it seemed to be getting more noticeable. I walked around to the driver's side of the car, keeping my eyes on it. Opened the door, the interior light came on. For a second, I looked down, then back up, and I couldn't find it. I scanned the sky, trying to locate the same spot. Everything looked normal. All the stars in their usual places, none of them lagging. I stepped away from the car, letting the interior light fade as the door closed. Looked up again. Still nothing. The sky looked completely normal now. I turned in a slow circle, trying to reorient myself, trying to find where it had been, but I couldn't. It was like it had never been there. I stood there for a minute, breathing slowly, listening. The faint hum came back, soft, distant, the usual background noise. I checked my phone again, 1:42. I stared at the time. That didn't make sense. It hadn't felt like 15 minutes, maybe 5 at most. I tried to think back through what I'd just done, lying on the hood, standing up, walking around, watching the star. But the timeline didn't line up. I got into the car and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking out through the windshield. The sky looked normal, nothing out of place. I started the engine. The headlights lit up the gravel and the edge of the field. Everything looked grounded again, normal. I pulled out slowly and drove back toward the main road. I kept glancing up through the windshield, half expecting to see it again. But nothing stood out, just stars, all behaving the way they should. By the time I got back into town, it felt almost unreal, like it hadn't actually happened. Except I couldn't shake that one detail. The way it lagged behind my vision. Not moving like everything else, not following the same rules, just slightly out of sync like it wasn't part of the sky at all. Just something sitting there, pretending to be. The radio didn't fade out the way it normally does. It just stopped. 1 second there was music, low, a local station I barely paid attention to, and the next second it cut to nothing, not even static, just silence, like someone had muted it. I noticed it right away because of how sudden it was. I reached over and tapped the volume knob, thinking maybe I'd hit something without realizing. Nothing changed. Still silent. I glanced at the display. The station was still there. No error, no signal warning. It just wasn't producing any sound. I turned the knob again, still nothing. That's when I became aware of how quiet everything else was. I was driving through open land, a long stretch between two towns. No houses nearby, just fields and low hills. It was late, after 1 a.m., and there weren't any other cars on the road. Usually, even when the radio cuts out, you get static, or at least some kind of noise. This was different. It felt like the sound had been removed. I adjusted in my seat and looked ahead, focusing on the road. The headlights stretched out in front of me, lighting the asphalt and the edge of the grass. Everything looked normal. I reached over and switched stations. Nothing. No static. No clicks, no change. Just silence. I felt a small tight feeling in my chest. Not panic, just something off. I turned the radio off completely. The silence stayed the same. It wasn't the radio. I drove a little further trying to ignore it. That's when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was a reflection on the windshield, a faint glow just at the top edge of my vision. I shifted slightly trying to catch it again. It was still there. Soft. Dim. Not bright enough to light anything around me, but noticeable against the dark sky. I frowned and looked up through the windshield. There was something there. Not a defined shape, just a faint, pale light. It was moving, slowly. Keeping pace with the car, I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. I looked back down at the road, then up again, still there. Same position, same distance. I eased off the accelerator slightly. The car slowed. The light slowed with me. I pressed the gas again. The car picked up speed. The light stayed with it. My mouth felt dry. I rolled the window down a bit just to hear something. Wind, tires, anything. But even that felt muted. The sound of the road was there, but it seemed distant, like it wasn't quite reaching me fully. I kept my eyes on the road, only glancing up occasionally. Each time the light was still there, always just above, always keeping pace. I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind me, nothing on either side, just empty road. I tried to convince myself it was something normal, maybe a reflection from inside the car, but it didn't move with me. It moved with the car. I slowed down again, this time more noticeably. Dropped from about 50 to 30. The light adjusted with me, no delay, no drift, perfectly matched. I felt a chill run through me. I reached for my phone, thinking I'd try to record it. As soon as I picked it up, the screen flickered slightly, just once, then it went back to normal. I hesitated, looked up again, the light was still there, unchanged. I raised the phone toward the windshield. The screen showed the road ahead. Dark, no light. I tilted it upward slightly. Still nothing. The camera wasn't picking it up. I lowered the phone slowly. My hands felt unsteady. I set it back in the holder and focused on driving. The road stretched ahead, empty. The light stayed above. Then something else changed. The feeling in my ears, a slight pressure, like when you change altitude. It wasn't painful, just noticeable. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I tapped the brakes gently. The car slowed again. The light adjusted instantly. Still directly above, still matching me exactly. I pressed the accelerator harder this time. The engine responded. The car sped up. The light stayed with it. No lag. No shift. Just there. I glanced at the radio again. Still on. Still silent. I reached out and turned it back on, even though it already was. Nothing changed. No sound. I looked back up. The light seemed a little closer now. Not brighter. Just lower. I could feel my heart beating faster. I didn't like how close it felt. I kept driving. Didn't stop. Didn't slow down again. Just held a steady speed, trying to get out of that stretch of road. After a minute or two, I saw something ahead. A distant glow. Streetlights from the next town. As I got closer, the normal sounds started to come back. The faint hum of power lines, a distant car somewhere. The pressure in my ears eased. I looked up again. The light was still there, but it felt further away now. Higher. I kept driving. The first streetlight passed over the car. The road became more defined, more familiar. I checked the radio. A burst of static hit suddenly. Then the station came back. Music slightly distorted at first, then normal. I looked up one more time. The light was gone. No fading. No movement away. Just not there anymore. I drove the rest of the way into town without stopping. Everything felt normal again. Sounds, lights, everything. But the silence stuck with me. Not just the radio, the way all the sound dropped out at once. And how, in that silence, that light had been there, keeping pace, like it was tracking me, waiting until something changed and it didn't need to anymore. I noticed it because the timestamp jumped. Not by much. Just a couple seconds. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop going through the security footage from the night before. Nothing specific had happened. I just check it every so often out of habit. I live alone, small place on the edge of a suburban area, backing onto a patch of trees. Quiet, but not isolated enough to feel unsafe. My name's Darren. The system I use is basic. 2 cameras, one covering the front driveway, one in the backyard facing the fence line and the trees. It records continuously and stores everything for a few days. I was scrubbing through the backyard feed when I saw it. The timestamp in the corner went from 2:14:30:33 to 30:30:36. It skipped 34 and 35. That happens sometimes, I guess. Compression issues, frame drops, I've seen small glitches before, but when I dragged the timeline back and replayed it, something else stood out. At 2:02:4:33, everything looked normal. Fence, lawn, the outline of the trees at the back, a small garden table near the center. Then the next frame, 36, everything looked off. Not blurry, not distorted, just slightly shifted, like the camera angle had moved a fraction of a degree. The fence line didn't quite match where it had been in the previous frame. The table looked a few inches to the left. Even the tree branches seemed out of alignment. Then the next frame, everything snapped back to normal, exactly where it had been before. I paused the video and leaned closer to the screen. It wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I played it again. Same thing. Normal frame. Shifted frame. Normal again. I frowned and checked the front camera. Scrolled to the same time. Everything normal. Same shift. Subtle, but there. The driveway looked slightly misaligned. The edge of the car didn't line up with the curb the way it should have. Back to normal. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Both cameras showed it. Same timestamp, same single frame shift. I checked the system logs. No errors, no motion alerts, nothing that would explain a sudden change in angle. I rewound a bit further, watched the minutes leading up to it. Everything was steady. No wind moving the trees, no animals in the yard, no changes in lighting, just stillness. Then that one frame, then normal again. I checked the earlier footage. Nothing like it. No other frames out of place, no other skips, just that one moment. I glanced toward the back door. The yard outside looked the same as it always did. Quiet, nothing unusual. I went back to the video and slowed it down as much as I could. Frame by frame. Normal, shifted, normal. I stared at the shifted frame longer this time. Something about it felt wrong. Not just the angle, the way everything lined up or didn't. It was like the whole scene had been nudged sideways slightly, but not consistently. Some things looked more shifted than others. The fence moved a bit. The table moved more. The trees, it was hard to tell, but they didn't match perfectly either. I leaned in closer, trying to spot anything else, any sign of movement, but there was nothing. No blur, no motion, just that one frame. Perfectly still, just wrong. I checked the time again, 02:14. I tried to think what I'd been doing then. I was asleep. I always am at that time. I checked my phone, just to see. No notifications, no activity. Battery level looked normal. Nothing stood out. I went back to the footage, watched it again, then again, each time the same thing, that one frame. I noticed something else after a while. It wasn't just the objects. The lighting felt slightly different in that frame. Not brighter, not darker, just off. Like the shadows weren't sitting where they should. I dragged the timeline back a few minutes and let it play at normal speed. Everything looked steady, consistent. Then it hit that moment. Even at normal speed, I could see it now. A tiny shift, barely noticeable, then gone. I paused it again, stared at that frame. The more I looked at it, the less it felt like a camera issue. It didn't look like the camera had moved. It looked like what it was looking at had changed, just for that instant. I pushed back from the table and stood up, walked over to the back door, opened it. The air outside was still, no wind, no sound. The yard looked exactly like it did on the screen. Fence in place, table where it should be, trees unmoving. I stepped out onto the patio, looked around. Everything felt normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing in the same spot that frame had captured. That exact moment. I went back inside and closed the door. Sat down again, played the footage one more time. I focused on the table this time. In the normal frame, it was centered between two fence posts. In the shifted frame, it was closer to the left one. Then it snapped back. No movement in between. No transition. Just one frame where it wasn't where it should be. I sat there for a long time, replaying it, trying to come up with something that made sense. A glitch, a data error, something with compression. But it didn't look like a glitch. It looked like the world had shifted slightly, just for a fraction of a second, and the cameras had caught it before everything went back. exactly the way it was, like nothing had ever changed at all. I saw it for maybe half a second, and I almost convinced myself it was nothing. I was driving back from a late shift around 1:30 in the morning. My name's Callum. I work maintenance at a distribution warehouse, and my route home cuts through a long stretch of open farmland. No houses for miles, just fencing, fields, and the occasional line of trees. That night was clear but cold. No fog, no rain. Just a dark sky with a lot of stars visible once you got away from town. I had the radio on low, not really listening to it, just background noise. The road out there is straight for a long time. You can see pretty far ahead, and there's nothing much to focus on, so your eyes wander. That's probably why I noticed it. I was looking ahead, then slightly up, just scanning without thinking. And then my headlights caught something. Not directly in front of the car. Higher, above the road. For a split second, there was a reflection. Smooth, curved, like light catching on glass or polished metal. It wasn't bright, just enough of a sheen to notice. Then it was gone. I blinked and leaned forward slightly, squinting at the sky. Nothing there, just stars. I slowed down a little, instinctively. Checked my mirrors. No one behind me. No other cars anywhere. I kept driving, but now I was watching the sky more carefully, trying to see if it would happen again. At first, I told myself it was something simple, a bird maybe, or something on the windshield catching the light, but it didn't feel like that. The reflection had been too smooth, too clean, and too high up. I drove another minute or so, nothing. Then I passed a break in the trees on the right where the field opened up more. My headlights spread wider across the ground, and again, for just a fraction of a second, that same kind of reflection flashed above, slightly ahead of the car. Same height, same smooth curve, like light glancing off the edge of something rounded, then gone. I hit the brakes a bit harder this time. The car slowed quickly. I kept my eyes locked on where I'd seen it. Nothing, no movement, no sound. I rolled the window down. The air outside was cold and still. No wind, no insects, no distant noise, just quiet. I eased the car forward again, slower now, maybe 20 miles per hour. My eyes kept shifting between the road and the sky. Every few seconds I looked up, trying to catch it again. I noticed something then. The stars above that section of road looked slightly off, not missing, just harder to focus on, like there was a faint distortion in that area. Subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. I drove a little further, then it happened again. The reflection, same spot relative to the car, same quick flash, like the headlights were hitting something at just the right angle. I felt my grip tighten on the wheel. I slowed even more, almost crawling now. The reflection didn't happen again immediately, but that distorted patch of sky stayed in front of me, like something was there, just outside what I could properly see. I stopped the car completely, left the engine running. Headlights still on, I leaned forward, staring through the windshield, trying to make sense of it. At that speed, the reflection should have stayed longer if it was something fixed, but it didn't. It only showed up for a split second each time, like it was moving with me, or adjusting somehow. I turned the headlights off, the road dropped into darkness, only the faint outline of the horizon and the stars remained. I stared up. The distortion was harder to see without the headlights, but it was still there. Barely, like a faint warping in the sky. I turned the headlights back on, the beam cut forward again. I waited. Nothing. Then, as I inched forward, there it was, a brief flash. Same curved surface, same smooth reflection, gone instantly. I exhaled slowly. I didn't want to get out of the car, didn't feel like checking. Something about it felt wrong in a quiet way, not threatening, just not meant to be interacted with. I drove forward again, a little faster now. The distortion stayed ahead of me for a few seconds. Then without warning, it shifted. Not visibly, just gone. The sky looked normal again. The stars snapped back into focus. No warping, no reflections, nothing. I kept driving, didn't stop again. The rest of the road was completely normal. By the time I reached the main road with proper lighting and the occasional passing car, it felt like I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. I knew what I saw, or at least what I didn't see. Something had been there. High above the road, smooth enough to catch the light, solid enough to bend it, and close enough that my headlights could reach it, even though I couldn't actually see it. The power went out around 11:40, No warning, everything just dropped. Lights, TV, even the little hum from the fridge. I was sitting on the couch at the time, phone in my hand, and the whole house went completely quiet in a way that felt immediate and heavy. My name's Aaron. I live on the edge of a small coastal town. Nothing remote, but not busy either. When the power cuts, it gets dark fast out here. I sat there for a second, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. I got up, feeling my way through the living room, and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The beam cut a narrow path through the dark, catching the edges of things. Chairs, the counter, the back door. I checked my phone. No signal bars, not even emergency. That was the first thing that felt off. Usually, even if the power goes, you still get signal. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain back. The street outside was completely dark, no porch lights. No street lights. A few houses had candles or torches, faint points of warm light, but otherwise it was just black. And above that, clouds. Thick, low clouds, the kind that block out everything. I stood there for a minute, just looking. Then I noticed the glow. It was faint at first, so faint I thought it was my eyes adjusting, a soft, pale light behind the clouds. Not lightning, it didn't flash. It just moved, slowly, like something drifting. I leaned closer to the window. The glow slid across the cloud layer, diffused by it like it was behind a curtain. But there was something wrong with it. The ground didn't light up, not even a little. If something that bright was moving behind clouds that low, there should have been some kind of reflection, some change in the darkness below. But there wasn't. The streets stayed the same. The houses stayed in shadow. Only the clouds had that faint movement in them. I stepped outside. The air was still. No wind, no sound of generators or people talking. Just a kind of quiet that felt deeper than usual. I stood on the small path in front of my house and looked up. The glow moved slowly across the sky. Not in a straight line. It drifted slightly, like it was adjusting, but it didn't pulse or flicker, just a steady, dim brightness. I looked down at the street again. Still nothing. No shadows shifting. No light touching anything below. It didn't make sense. I walked a few steps out into the road. The surface was barely visible, just a darker line against the black. I looked back up. The glow had shifted further along. Still behind the clouds, still not lighting anything beneath it. I tried to judge the size. It was hard. The clouds made it feel larger than it probably was, but there was no clear edge, just a soft area of brightness. Then I noticed something else, the stars, or the lack of them. In the areas where the clouds thinned slightly, you could usually catch glimpses of stars behind them. But around the glow, there was nothing. No points of light at all. Like that part of the sky was just empty. I stayed there longer than I meant to, watching it move, trying to make sense of it. After a while, it slowed, not dramatically, just enough that I could tell it wasn't drifting the same way as the clouds. It felt independent, like it wasn't part of the weather. I turned in a slow circle, checking the rest of the sky. Everything else looked normal. Same heavy cloud cover, same darkness, no other light sources. When I looked back, the glow had dimmed slightly, not faded completely, just less noticeable. It kept moving though, slow, deliberate. I realized then that there was still no sound, no distant aircraft noise, no rumble, nothing, just silence. I walked back toward the house, but I didn't go inside. I stayed near the door, watching. The glow kept drifting. Then, gradually, it started to shrink, not move away, just compress. The area of brightness got smaller, tighter, like it was pulling in on itself. I frowned, trying to track it. It got smaller still, fainter, until it was just a dull patch in the clouds. Then it was gone. The clouds returned to uniform darkness. I stood there for a few seconds longer, staring at where it had been. Nothing. Just the same thick cloud cover. A minute later, the streetlights flickered back on. One by one, houses lit up again. The usual sounds returned, someone's generator clicking off, a dog barking in the distance. My phone buzzed in my hand as the signal came back. I went inside, closed the door. The house filled with light again, like nothing had happened. But I kept thinking about the way that glow moved, how it stayed behind the clouds, bright enough to see, but not bright enough to touch anything below, like whatever it was there, but not meant to be seen from the ground. I was standing outside when it happened, just getting some air. It was late, around 9:30, and still warm from the day. I'd stepped out into the backyard with my phone, planning to call my brother. My name's Daniel. I live in a quiet suburban area, nothing remote, just rows of houses and fenced gardens. It was one of those still evenings where everything feels a bit heavy but calm. No wind, no traffic noise beyond the occasional car in the distance. I leaned against the fence, scrolling through my contacts when I felt it. A sudden pressure in my ears, like when you're in a plane and it drops slightly. Not painful, just a quick, uncomfortable shift. I swallowed instinctively, trying to clear it. It didn't go away right away. Instead, it deepened slightly, like the air around me had thickened. I looked up without really thinking. The sky was mostly clear, a few thin clouds drifting, stars just starting to show. Nothing unusual. I rubbed my ears, swallowing again. The pressure eased a bit, but didn't fully disappear. Then I noticed how quiet it had gotten. The background noise had dropped off. No distant cars, no rustling from the trees. Even the faint hum you don't usually notice was gone. Just silence. I straightened up and looked around the yard. Everything looked normal. The fence, the shed, the back of the house. Nothing out of place. But the air still felt off, like something had shifted slightly. Then I saw the light. At first, I thought it was a plane, just a dim point moving across the sky. But it wasn't blinking, and it wasn't moving in a straight line. It drifted, slowly, almost lazily. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. The light was faint, not bright enough to cast anything on the ground, just a small, steady glow. It moved overhead, not directly above me, but close enough that I had to tilt my head back to follow it. The pressure in my ears returned slightly as I watched, a subtle, constant feeling. I stepped forward into the middle of the yard for a better view. The light continued drifting. No sound, no engine noise, no rotor blades, nothing. Just that quiet, steady movement. I squinted, trying to see if there was anything around the light, any shape, any outline. But there wasn't, just darkness around it. I checked the houses on either side. No one else was outside. No porch lights flicking on. No signs anyone else had noticed it. I looked back up. The light had moved a bit further along, still slow, still silent. Then it did something that made me pause. It didn't change direction. It didn't speed up, but it seemed to adjust, like it shifted slightly, correcting its path. The movement was subtle, easy to miss, but it didn't feel like drifting anymore. It felt controlled. The pressure in my ears increased again for a moment. Not enough to hurt, but enough to notice. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It popped slightly, then settled. The light kept moving. I turned slowly to follow it. Now it was almost directly above the house. Still no sound, still no light reaching the ground. That was the part that didn't make sense. Even a dim light should have done something. Cast a faint shadow, reflected off something. But the yard stayed exactly the same. Flat, dark, unchanged. I took a few steps closer to the house, without really thinking about it. The light drifted past the roofline. For a second, I lost sight of it. Then it reappeared on the other side. Same speed, same faint glow. The pressure in my ears eased again. I realized I was holding my breath and let it out slowly. The air felt normal again. Still, but not heavy anymore. The light continued across the sky, gradually getting further away. It didn't speed up, didn't fade suddenly. It just kept moving until it was smaller, fainter, then eventually gone. I stood there for a few more seconds, staring at where it had been. The sky looked normal again. Stars scattered evenly, clouds drifting slowly, no sign anything had passed through. The background noise returned, a car somewhere down the road, a dog barking in the distance, the faint hum of the neighborhood settling back in. I rubbed my ears again. The pressure was completely gone. I went back inside after that, closed the door behind me. The house felt normal, warm, still. But I kept thinking about how quiet it had gotten, how the air had felt heavier, and how that light moved. Slow enough to watch, silent enough to ignore, and close enough that I should have heard something, but didn't. I noticed the compass before anything else felt off. I'd stopped to check my route, nothing unusual about that. My name's Marcus. I was hiking alone along a ridge trail that runs above a long stretch of forest, the kind of place where you don't see anyone for hours once you're out there. It was early afternoon, overcast but dry. Not foggy, just a dull gray sky that flattened everything out a bit. I pulled the compass from the side pocket of my bag and held it flat in my palm. The needle trembled, not spinning, just a slight vibration, like it couldn't settle. I frowned and waited a second. Usually it finds north almost immediately, but this time it kept shaking faintly. Then it stopped and pointed off. Not wildly wrong, just a few degrees off where I knew north should be based on the trail and the map. I turned slightly, adjusting my position. The needle stayed where it was. I rotated my body again. Still wrong. I checked the map. The ridgeline was clear enough that I could orient myself without the compass. The direction it was pointing didn't match. I held it up higher, away from my body. Sometimes metal or electronics can mess with it, but there was nothing around. No power lines, no structures, just open land and trees below. The needle stayed fixed. I tapped the side lightly. It twitched, then settled back into the same incorrect direction. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide if it was just a faulty reading. Then I noticed something else. The air felt still. Not calm, still, like everything had paused. I looked around. The trees below weren't moving, no wind through the branches, no sound of birds. Nothing. I hadn't noticed it at first, but now it was obvious. The quiet was too complete. I slipped the compass into my hand again and started walking. The trail curved along the ridge with a drop on one side and a gradual slope on the other. As I moved, I kept glancing down at the needle. It didn't change, didn't adjust as I walked, just stayed fixed in that slightly wrong direction. I walked maybe another 100 meters before stopping again. Pulled the compass out, held it steady. Same result. I turned in a slow circle. The needle didn't respond the way it should have. It moved a little, but always settled back to that same incorrect point. I checked my phone next. No signal, which wasn't unusual out there, but the GPS took longer than normal to load. When it did, the position marker flickered slightly. Not jumping, just unstable. I zoomed in and out, trying to get a better fix. It didn't improve. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The quiet pressed in again. No wind, no insects, no distant sounds. I became aware of my own breathing, too loud. I took a few more steps along the trail. The ground felt normal. No change there, but something about the space around me felt off, like the air had a density to it. I stopped again, this time looking out over the edge of the ridge. The forest stretched out below, dark green and uniform. Nothing moving, no sign of animals, no rustling. I looked back at the trail behind me. Empty. Then I noticed the light. Not bright, just a faint glow on the horizon, off to the right, low, almost at the tree line. I hadn't seen it before. It pulsed once, very faint. Then stayed steady. I stared at it, trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't a reflection. There was no direct sunlight. It wasn't a vehicle. Too far out and no road in that direction. The compass in my hand shifted slightly. The needle trembled again, then settled back into the same wrong direction. I looked down at it, then back at the glow. The two didn't line up, but something about them felt connected. I took a step toward the edge of the ridge, trying to get a better view. The glow didn't change, didn't get brighter or dimmer, just stayed there, still. Then it pulsed again, once soft. The needle on the compass jerked slightly, just a quick movement, then back to the same position. I felt a tightness in my chest. Not panic, just a growing sense that something wasn't right. I stepped back from the edge, looked around again. Still no sound, no movement. I turned slowly, scanning the area. Nothing behind me, nothing to the sides, just that distant glow. I decided to keep moving, not toward the light, just along the trail. As I walked, I kept the compass in my hand. The needle stayed wrong. No correction, no adjustment, like it was locked. After a few minutes, the air began to feel normal again. Subtle at first, then more noticeable. A faint breeze moved through. I heard a distant rustle from the trees below. A bird called somewhere far off. I slowed down, turned back to look behind me. The glow was gone. Completely, just the same dull horizon. No trace of it. I looked down at the compass. The needle trembled slightly, then swung and settled into the correct direction. I stopped walking, checked it again, turned in a circle. Everything responded normally now. I pulled my phone out. The GPS locked in quickly this time. Stable, accurate. I stood there for a minute, just taking it in. The sounds were back. The wind was light but steady. Everything felt right again. I kept walking after that. Didn't turn back, but I kept checking the compass every so often. It stayed normal the rest of the way. The only thing that didn't was the memory of how it felt when it wasn't. I was just sitting there with the engine off when it happened. It was late, maybe a little after midnight. I'd pulled into a gravel turnout just off a coastal road. My name's Liam. I used to go there sometimes to clear my head, just sit in the car and look out toward the water. You can't really see much at night, just a dark horizon and occasional distant light from boats. That night was calm. No wind, no rain, just that steady quiet you get near the coast when everything settles down. I had the seat leaned back a bit, radio off, just sitting there. The car was completely still. Then I felt it, a slight lift. Not a jolt, not like something hit the car. More like the suspension eased upward for a second, like weight had been taken off it. It was subtle. If I hadn't been sitting still, I probably wouldn't have noticed, but I did. I straightened up in the seat, looking around instinctively. Nothing had changed. The car wasn't rolling, the ground was flat. I checked the handbrake out of habit, still engaged. I opened the door slightly and looked down at the tires. They were planted normally on the gravel. No shifting, no marks. I closed the door and sat back, tried to recreate it in my head. Maybe I'd moved without realizing. Shifted my weight, but it hadn't felt like that. It had felt like something external. I stayed still for a minute, waiting. Nothing. The car felt normal again. I leaned back slowly, testing it. The suspension moved the way it should. No unusual give, no weird bounce. I exhaled and looked out through the windshield. The road ahead was empty. No headlights in either direction. The sky was clear, a few stars visible above the dark line of the sea. I sat there another couple minutes, trying to shake it off. Then I noticed something else. The air felt quiet. Not just calm, muted, like the usual background noise had been turned down. I listened carefully. No waves, even though the water was right there beyond the edge. No wind, no distant cars, just silence. I frowned and shifted slightly in the seat. The car creaked a little, normal settling, but the sound felt louder than it should have, like everything else had been dampened. I leaned forward and looked up through the windshield. At first, I didn't see anything, just sky. Then I noticed a faint glow, high up, not bright, just a dim patch that moved slowly. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. It drifted across the sky, not in a straight line, more like a slow, controlled glide. No blinking lights, no sound. I watched it for a few seconds, barely breathing. The car still felt completely still beneath me. Then, without warning, I felt it again, that same subtle lift. The car rose slightly, like the suspension relaxed again, just for a second. Then it settled back down. I grabbed the steering wheel instinctively, even though I wasn't moving. My eyes flicked up to the sky. The glow was still there, but it had shifted slightly, closer, or maybe just more directly above. It was hard to tell. I stayed completely still. The silence pressed in. I became aware of how quiet it really was. No insects, no wind, nothing. The glow drifted slowly, and as it did, I felt the car respond. Not lifting fully, just small, almost imperceptible changes in pressure, like the weight on it wasn't consistent. I looked at the dashboard. Everything was off. No electrical flicker, no warning lights. I reached out and tapped the steering wheel lightly. Solid. Normal. But the feeling underneath me wasn't. It was like the car wasn't fully settled, like it was lighter. I swallowed and glanced toward the side window. Nothing outside, just darkness. I forced myself to look back up. The glow had dimmed slightly, still moving, still silent. I tried to track its speed. It was slow, too slow for anything I recognized, and still no sound. The pressure under me shifted once more, a faint rise, then back down. I felt my grip tighten on the wheel. I didn't want to get out, didn't want to step into whatever that silence was. I just sat there, watching, waiting. After a few more seconds, the glow started to fade, not abruptly, just gradually, like it was moving further away or losing whatever was making it visible. The car settled fully. I could feel it. The suspension returned to normal. The slight tension under me disappeared. The silence broke. A faint sound of waves came back, distant, but there. Then a car passed somewhere far down the road. Normal noise, normal space. I sat there for a while longer. Didn't move, didn't start the engine. Just stayed in the seat, feeling the car beneath me, making sure it was solid, grounded, the way it should be. Eventually, I started the engine and pulled back onto the road. Drove home without stopping again. But the whole time, I kept thinking about that moment. That brief, subtle lift. Like something had taken just enough weight off the car to remind me that it wasn't entirely fixed to the ground. I noticed it because I'd been watching my shadow the whole way home. Not for any real reason. It was late, just after midnight, and I'd taken a shortcut through a quiet estate I don't usually walk through. My name's Joel. It's one of those places where the streetlights are spaced out just enough that your shadow stretches and shrinks as you move between them. I'd had a couple drinks, not enough to be out of it, just enough to feel a bit loose. The air was cold, clear, no wind. Everything felt still. I remember looking down at my shadow as I walked under one of the lights. It stretched out long in front of me, then tightened under my feet, then swung behind me as I passed through. Normal. I kept walking. The road ahead was empty. No cars, no people, just rows of houses with most of the lights off. I stepped into the next pool of light. Same thing. Shadow moved, shifted, followed. I don't know why I kept watching it, but I did. There was something about the repetition of it that kept my attention. Then I reached the next street light, and it didn't behave the same. I stepped into the light, and my shadow was just gone. Not faint, not shortened, gone. For a split second, there was nothing on the ground. I stopped mid-step, looked down. The pavement was lit normally. No flicker in the light, no obstruction, but no shadow. Then I took another step forward, and it came back, exactly where it should have been, trailing slightly behind me. I stood there for a second, trying to process it. I stepped back into the light. Shadow. I stepped forward again. Shadow, still there. I walked back to where it had disappeared. Nothing unusual. Same brightness, same angle. I shifted my weight slightly, moving side to side. The shadow moved with me. I frowned and looked up at the streetlight. It was working fine. No flickering, no dimming, just a steady, pale glow. I stepped out of the light and into the darker stretch between posts. My shadow stretched out again, faint but visible. I kept walking, but slower now, watching the ground, watching how it moved. I reached the next light, stepped into it. Shadow, normal. I exhaled slightly, telling myself I'd imagined it. But then I remembered exactly how it had felt, that brief absence, like something had been missing that shouldn't be. I kept going. The road curved slightly ahead, with another light at the bend. As I approached it, I focused more carefully, watching every detail, the angle of the light, the way my shadow formed. I stepped into it. Shadow appeared, followed. No issue. I took a few more steps, then stopped under the light, looked down. Everything normal. I stepped back out, then forward again. Still normal. I shook my head slightly, trying to dismiss it, started walking again. A few houses down, I noticed something else. The air felt quieter. Not silent, just reduced, like the usual background noise had dropped slightly. I slowed down, listened. There was still distant sound, but it felt further away, muted. I kept walking. The next streetlight was ahead, casting a long, pale circle on the road. As I approached it, I felt that same slight tension again. I don't know why. Nothing looked different, but I was watching closely now. I stepped into the light, and for just a moment, nothing. No shadow. The ground was fully lit, but empty. Then I blinked, and it was back, in the correct place, like it had always been there. I stopped immediately, turned around slowly, looked behind me. Nothing. Just the road, the houses, the quiet. I looked back down. My shadow was there, attached, normal. I lifted my foot slightly and set it down. The shadow moved with it, no delay, no issue. I stepped backward, still there. I stepped forward again, still there, but I couldn't shake that gap, that split second where it hadn't existed. I stood under the light longer than I should have, watching, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. Everything stayed normal. Eventually, I forced myself to keep walking. The rest of the way home, I didn't stop watching the ground. Every streetlight, every step. My shadow behaved exactly how it should. Stretching, shrinking, shifting with me. Nothing else disappeared. But I kept thinking about those two moments. How it hadn't faded, hadn't distorted, just stopped existing. Like, for that brief step under a working light, there had been nothing there, where something should have been following me. I found out about it the next morning, not from anything I noticed myself, but from my neighbor. I was taking the bins out when Martin from next door leaned over the fence and asked if I'd had something odd going on the night before. He's not the type to mess around or exaggerate things, so the way he said it caught my attention. I asked him what he meant. He hesitated a bit, then said he'd been up late, couldn't sleep, and went to the window around 2 a.m. He said he saw a light above my house. Not a bright one, just something hovering. I laughed it off at first, asked if it was a drone or something. He shook his head, said it didn't move like one, it didn't make any noise either. Just stayed there for a bit, then drifted slightly and disappeared. I told him I hadn't noticed anything. He nodded, but he still looked a bit unsure, like he didn't fully trust what he'd seen. We left it at that, but it stuck with me. Later that morning, I remembered I had a security camera pointed at the front of the house. Nothing fancy, just a standard setup that records overnight. I went inside and pulled up the footage. Scrolled back to around 2 a.m. Everything looked normal at first. The driveway, the street, a car passing around 150. Nothing unusual. I let it play. At 2:07, I noticed something. A flicker. Just one frame where the image seemed to shift slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to catch my eye, like the exposure had jumped for a split second. Then it went back to normal. I paused the footage, rewound it, played it again, same thing. A single flicker. I leaned closer to the screen. Something about it didn't look like a typical camera glitch. It wasn't just brightness, the image itself looked slightly off, like the angle had shifted a fraction. Then I noticed the timestamp. It jumped from 2:07:13 to 2:07:19. 6 seconds missing. I frowned. That shouldn't happen. The system records continuously. There's no motion detection or anything that would cause gaps like that. I checked the rest of the footage. Everything else was intact. No other skips, no other flickers, just that one moment. I went back again and watched it slower, frame by frame. Right before the flicker, everything looked normal. Then that single distorted frame. Then the timestamp jump, then back to normal. No transition, no sign of anything happening in between, just missing time. I leaned back in my chair, trying to think of a reason for it. Power fluctuation, signal drop, but there hadn't been any outages. No other devices had reset. I checked the system logs. Nothing recorded at that time. No errors, no interruptions. I went outside and looked up at where the camera was mounted. Still in place, no damage, no loose wiring, everything seemed fine. I stood there for a minute, looking up at the sky above the house. Clear daylight now. Nothing unusual, but I kept thinking about what Martin had said. A light, hovering, right above the house, and then that gap in the footage. I went back inside and watched it again. This time, I focused on the frame just before the flicker. There was something subtle there. Hard to notice at first. A slight change in the shadows on the driveway, not moving, just shifted, like the light source had changed direction for a moment. But there was no car, no passing headlights, nothing that should have caused that. Then the flicker, then the gap, then everything normal again. I checked the other cameras, backyard, side of the house, same thing, at roughly the same time. A flicker, then a gap, different angles, but the same missing seconds. I tried to line them up, see if anything overlapped, but the gaps weren't perfectly synced. One camera missed 2:07:13, another missed 2:15 to 2:21. Close, but not exact. Like they'd all been affected slightly differently. I felt a bit uneasy at that point. Not scared, just unsettled. I went outside again, this time into the backyard, stood where the camera covered, looked up, the sky was empty, no signs of anything. I tried to picture what Martin might have seen, a hovering light, quiet, still, then gone. And in that same moment, every camera around the house had that brief interruption. 6 seconds. Gone. No explanation. I went back inside and left the footage paused on that distorted frame, looked at it for a long time, trying to make sense of what was different about it, but it was too subtle. Just a slight shift, a small inconsistency, like the image had been stretched for a moment, then corrected. I closed the app after a while. Didn't feel like staring at it anymore. But later that night, when everything was quiet again, I found myself looking out the window, at the same patch of sky, thinking about those 6 seconds, and how whatever had been there hadn't shown up clearly on any camera, just enough to leave a flicker and a gap where something should have been recorded, but wasn't. I noticed it because I was already awake, waiting for sunrise. I'd driven out early, around 4:30, to a stretch of coastline about 20 minutes from my place. My name's Owen. I go there sometimes when I can't sleep. There's a small gravel pull-off above the cliffs where you can sit in your car and watch the horizon. That morning was cold, no wind, just a flat gray sky that was starting to thin out. It looked like it might clear. I had the engine off, sitting in the driver's seat with the window cracked open. It was quiet in that way you only get before dawn. No birds yet, no cars, just the distant sound of water far below. I was watching the horizon, waiting for that first gradual light. The usual slow spread from one point outward, but it didn't happen like that. At first, I thought my eyes were adjusting, a faint brightening, but not where it should have been. It wasn't along the horizon line. It was higher, off to the left. Just a small patch of lighter gray. I leaned forward slightly, focusing on it. It stayed in place, didn't spread, didn't shift like clouds do when they catch early light. Just sat there. Then a second patch appeared. Further to the right, same kind of brightness, not strong, just enough to notice. I frowned and glanced at the actual horizon, still dark, no sign of sunrise beginning. I looked back up. Now there were 3 patches, scattered, uneven, none of them connected. It didn't look like light breaking through clouds, it looked like separate areas were being lit independently. I opened the car door and stepped out. The cold hit immediately. The air felt heavier than it should have for that time of morning. I stood beside the car, looking up. The patches of brightness held steady. No flickering. No gradual expansion. Just there. I checked my watch. Still too early for sunrise. At least another 20 minutes. I scanned the sky, trying to find a pattern. There wasn't one. The patches were irregular, different sizes, different intensities, but all faint. All quiet. I listened. Nothing. No wind, no distant engines, no movement in the air. Then one of the patches dimmed slightly, not faded out, just reduced, like someone had turned it down. A second one followed, the third stayed the same. I shifted my weight, feeling uneasy without knowing why. Something about it felt controlled, not natural. I took a few steps away from the car onto the rough grass near the edge. From there, the view of the sky was clearer. The horizon remained dark, completely unchanged. No gradual glow, no hint of morning breaking. But above it, those scattered patches continued to brighten and dim. Slowly, independently. Then one of them moved. Not fast, just a slight drift, barely noticeable, but enough that I caught it. I held my breath, watching. It didn't follow the movement of the clouds. The clouds were barely moving at all, and when they did, they moved in a different direction. The patch drifted on its own. I rubbed my hands together, trying to warm them. The cold felt sharper now, more focused. I glanced back at the car, then up again. Another patch shifted, again, slight. Almost like it was correcting its position. I couldn't tell if they were getting closer or just changing shape. There was no depth to it. No way to judge distance. I stepped back toward the car, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt standing out there. The silence was still complete. Too complete. Then, without warning, the patches began to fade. Not all at once, one at a time. The one on the left dimmed first, gradually disappearing into the gray. Then the one on the right. The center patch lingered a bit longer, fainter now. Then it, too, faded. I stood there, staring at where they'd been. The sky returned to uniform gray. No uneven brightness, no scattered light, just flat, dull cloud cover. I checked the horizon again. Still dark, still no sign of sunrise. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Eventually, the real light started to appear, the normal way, a gradual brightening along the horizon, spreading outward, even, predictable, like it always does. I got back into the car and sat there watching it happen, trying to match it with what I'd seen earlier, but it didn't match. Not at all. The earlier light hadn't spread, hadn't come from the horizon, hadn't behaved like sunlight. It had just appeared in separate places and then disappeared without becoming anything else. I stayed until the sun was fully up. Everything looked normal again. The sea, the sky, the road behind me. But I kept thinking about those patches, how they lit up parts of the sky that shouldn't have been lit yet, and then faded, like whatever was behind them had decided it was done. We were out in the Mojave Desert, about 50 miles northwest of Joshua Tree, camping for the weekend. It was me, my wife Eliza, and our daughter Naomi, she was 7 at the time, plus our dog, a skinny little terrier mix named Juno. We'd chosen a spot on BLM land away from the campgrounds to get some real quiet. The sky was wide open out there, endless stars, the kind of place where you can see the Milky Way without any city glow. It was late April, and the days were warm, but the nights still got pretty cold. That first night, after we'd eaten and settled in, I went to start a small fire to keep us warm. Eliza and Naomi were inside the tent reading a book by flashlight. Juno was sniffing around the edges, chasing lizards or whatever desert critters come out at night. I was about 20 feet away from the tent, tending the fire, when I first noticed it. It was faint, like a whisper carried on the dry wind. I thought maybe it was the usual desert noises, the wind shifting through the scrub or a pack of coyotes in the distance. But then it got clearer, and it didn't sound like any animal or human I'd ever heard. It was voices. Multiple voices, whispering in a way that sounded like they were all talking at once, overlapping.